Chapter 1: The Razor's Edge. The Arizona desert plain stretched out under the blistering sun, a vast expanse of desolation where only the hardiest of scrub cacti broke the monotony of the landscape, their forms shimmering in the heat haze. High walls encircled the Pilgrim Crossing Psychiatric Hospital, topped with spirals of concertina wire and manned watchtowers, a testament to the dangerous nature of the patients confined within. In the stark interview room at Pilgrim Crossing, a stainless steel table occupied the center of the space. Jocelyn Eberly, one of the resident psychiatrists, sat on one side, her mid-30s beauty unadorned by pretense. An open file lay before her, but her eyes were distant, her face pinched with distress, lost in the turmoil of her thoughts. The door swung open, and a guard peeked in, breaking Jocelyn from her reverie. "Your patient's here, Dr. Eberly," he announced. Jocelyn steeled herself. "You can send him in," she replied, her voice steady despite the unease that gnawed at her. The guard held the door open for an orderly pushing Edmund Bodeker into the room, an imposing figure handcuffed to the arms of a wheelchair, draped in a tear-resistant smock. Despite his unassuming appearance, a violent storm raged behind Edmund's eyes. The orderly maneuvered Edmund to the table, guiding the wheelchair's wheels into designated grooves on the floor. With a wave of his hand over a panel, clamps sprang out, fastening to the wheels and rooting Edmund firmly in place. The orderly then took up a position by the closed door, standing watch like a sentinel. Jocelyn took a moment to review Edmund's file. Stolen glances at the crime scene photos revealed the eviscerated bodies of young women, unearthed from crude burial sites. Edmund spoke, pegging Jocelyn for a possible admirer. "You'll have to forgive me for the Nordlinger girl. That was a mess, I know. But it served as a great resume builder." Jocelyn closed the file, regarding Edmund for a moment. "Edmund, my name's Dr. Jocelyn Eberly. I'm a psychiatrist here at Pilgrim Crossing. I know that you normally meet with Dr. Stortveit, but the administration board felt you were making," she paused, framing her words delicately, "limited progress under his purview." "That's funny. I felt Dr. Stortveit and I had struck up a nice rapport. I tried telling them too, but they insisted that I see you," Edmund responded, a hint of amusement in his voice. Jocelyn's ears pricked up. "Who insisted, Edmund?" Edmund's brow furrowed, his face knotted with discomfort. "I'm sorry, Dr. Eberly. I'm having a difficult time concentrating." Jocelyn nodded to the orderly, who moved to Edmund, unlocking his handcuffed left hand and setting a pad and pencil on the table. Edmund scrutinized the pencil's tip with a disapproving look. "This is dull," he remarked. "It's sharp enough, Rembrandt," the orderly retorted before returning to his post by the door. "He always calls me Rembrandt. It must be the only painter he knows," Edmund mused aloud. With his free hand, he committed pencil to paper, drawing a circle with painstaking exactitude, an exercise that seemed to have a calming effect on him. Jocelyn persisted. "You said you tried telling them that you wanted to stay under Dr. Stortveit's care, Edmund. Who did you say this to?" Unable to derail Edmund's train of thought, he continued, "People often forget about Giotto, even though it's his work that has come to represent the advent of the Italian Renaissance." Edmund balled up his first effort and began a new circle. Once word of Giotto's considerable talents began to spread, it said the Pope himself sent one of his most trusted aesthetes to Florence to observe and ultimately determine whether or not Giotto's skills were worthy of the Vatican's commission. Discarding another failed attempt, Edmund started over. Jocelyn watched as the pencil meticulously traced its orbit on the paper, shaking from the exertion. "And how did Giotto choose to demonstrate his craft to the Holy Father's emissary?" he questioned rhetorically. "Unsatisfied," he muttered as he crumpled another ball of paper, adding it to the growing pile. "A fresco of the Lamentation of Christ, perhaps." He discarded another effort. "Or an altarpiece depicting the Annunciation." The pencil quivered under the pressure, the veins in Edmund's wrist engorged and pulsating. No. Giotto simply dipped his fine-tipped brush in a bit of red paint and drew a circle on canvas. The concentrated stress finally beheaded the pencil, the sheared-off graphite gouging a divot out of the paper. Edmund's face curdled, instantly sickened. He pitched left and violently retched. Jocelyn stood upright, and the orderly moved to help Edmund, but Edmund, now full of grim determination, reached into his puddle of sickness, finding a small carrier tube. He flicked off the top, brandishing a serrated shiv. Catching sight of the shiv, Jocelyn called to the orderly, "Stay away from him." The orderly glanced up at Jocelyn, registering her warning. That was all it took. Edmund seized the moment and struck up at the orderly like a coiled snake. His shiv found the orderly's abdomen 10 times in half as many seconds. Jocelyn watched the bloodletting with mute horror. The orderly fell back, becoming Edmund's 16th career victim by the time he hit the floor. Still rooted to the wheelchair by a handcuff, Edmund extended his free arm, trying to reel in the orderly's body and the keys attached to his belt. Jocelyn moved for the door, but Edmund spun around, blocking her path. They stood at a standstill. Jocelyn couldn't reach the door without crossing into Edmund's striking radius, and Edmund was fixed in place like a leashed dog. "Do you know why they came to me, Dr. Eberly?" Edmund flexed, testing the give of the handcuff. "They were admirers of my work." Edmund angled his handcuffed wrist on the armrest of the wheelchair. He then raised his foot and brought it down hard, snapping the bones in his wrist, his hand falling limply. Using the shiv, he hacked through his flaccid wrist, crudely sawing off his hand. Free from bondage, Edmund tucked his spurting stump into the folds of his smock, his rabid eyes stalking Jocelyn. "Listen to me, Edmund. Without immediate medical attention, you will bleed to death," Jocelyn pleaded. Edmund put his weight against the metal table, pushing it forward, driving Jocelyn back towards the far wall. Trying to speak over the grating shrill of the table, Jocelyn continued, "I don't know what they promised you, Edmund. But they're just using you." The table bore down on Jocelyn, sending her backpedaling to the wall, forcing her to commit to a side. She shot right. Edmund moved to intercept, slashing at her. Jocelyn threw up her arm defensively, a jagged slit opening up on her forearm like a ripped seam. Edmund swiped at Jocelyn's throat. She instinctively ducked under and went for the door, but lost her footing, slipping in the orderly's pooling blood. Edmund pounced, about to deliver the death blow, but Jocelyn wheeled around, gripping the orderly's taser gun. She fired, both probes sinking into Edmund's torso. The conductive wire's 26-watt current sent Edmund to the floor in a spasmodic fit, flapping like a beached fish. Finally alerted to the turmoil, the guard burst into the room, tackling and restraining Edmund before he could recover. Jocelyn cowered in the corner, awash in the orderly's blood. Chapter 2: Wings of War. Lying on the fringe of the Mojave, Humboldt Air Force Base appeared unassuming at first glance, its lack of aircraft making it seem more like a ruggedized trailer park than a military installation. Inside Trailer 18, the Ground Control Station, GCS, was a hub of high-tech warfare, equipped with a pilot's chair, an array of monitors, and a joystick. Here, Lieutenant Colonel Roger Eberly, in his mid-30s, was already a seasoned veteran. Much like the drone he piloted, Roger functioned as a perfectly calibrated instrument of war. Scars lining his scalp bore witness to his past involvement in kinetic operations. Roger's eyes were fixed on a monitor displaying a real-time feed from his hovering drone. The village below glowed in phosphorus green, heat signatures of people on the roofs hinting at potential snipers. Colonel Olmsted, Roger's direct superior, entered the trailer. Without turning around, Roger reported, "I'm still loitering, sir. Ground Blue Force elements are holding fast 3 clicks away." Olmsted held up a sheet of documentation. "This just came in from HQ," he said, reading from the document. "Ground Command of Accelerated Pacification Campaign, Shining Spearhead, hereby grants remote pilot clearance to engage. In other words, Lieutenant, reduce that village to ash." Roger frowned at the screen. "Sir, I don't believe we've met a positive identification criteria for hostiles down there just yet." Pointing at the screen, Olmsted retorted, "Really? Because I'm staring at a rat's nest of snipers down there. Why else would they be assuming a prostrate position on their roofs? When it gets hot at night, those people can't exactly turn on the air conditioning. So they end up falling asleep topside," Roger explained, his tone even but firm. Olmsted countered with a bureaucratic approach. "Pattern of life analysis shows that AQ drove out the non-combatants." Most of them, sir. Not all of them, Roger replied. Olmsted's voice turned coldly assertive. We have our orders, Lieutenant. Roger's hand hesitated on the joystick, hovering over the decision to commence an indiscriminate airstrike on the village. Suddenly, an idea struck him. I know how we can distinguish the civilians from the insurgents, sir. He keyed a few commands, and a crosshair appeared on one of the screens. With the joystick, Roger positioned it on the village's periphery. We can use the infrared designator to separate the foxes from the hens. A circle of infrared strobe light appeared, and Roger traced the fringe of the village, directing the beam in a 180-degree arc. It's like karaoke. Anyone looking through a night vision scope will follow the bouncing ball. For a beat, the ambient figures on the roofs remained motionless. Olmsted's impatience was palpable. Just as he was about to give Roger a serious dressing down, movement caught their attention. Figures on two roofs repositioned to track the infrared light, clearly sniper-spotter tandems. Roger remarked, Looks like they can see in the dark, sir. Despite himself, Olmsted was impressed with Roger's tactical ingenuity. He gave Roger a nod of approval and walked away. Roger swiftly obtained target acquisition on both roofs. Into his headset he said, Hunter 7, this is Dragonfly. Switching to precision ordnance. Firing for effect. Outside, in the courtyard of Humboldt Air Force Base, Roger stepped onto the artificial turf-laden enclosure. A sign at the gate warned, Cell phones may be activated beyond this point. As he switched on his cell phone, it buzzed with a backlog of missed calls and voicemails. Roger, clad in his Air Force-issued flight suit, sprinted down the hospital hallway, his eyes scanning the room numbers with urgency. As he rounded a corner, he spotted Sidney Juergens, the bespectacled late-50s chief administrator of Pilgrim Crossing, pacing anxiously outside one of the rooms. Roger squared up to Sidney, his frustration boiling over. I thought you searched these guys, Sidney. How the fuck did he get a blade into that room? Roger demanded, his voice tinged with anger. Sidney responded with a quiet, placating tone, hoping it would calm the situation. We do check them thoroughly, Roger, I can assure you. But this guy had the weapon lodged in his digestive tract. And how did this psychotic get his hands on a shiv in the first place? Roger pressed, his impatience growing. We're looking into that, Roger. We're doing everything we can. Sidney trailed off, his words fading as Roger brushed past him indignantly. Inside the hospital room, Roger stood at the foot of the bed where Jocelyn sat upright, her arms guardedly interlocked, a blank, traumatized look on her face. Her lacerated forearm was bandaged and wrapped. I spoke with the hospital staff. They agreed to let you stay here until I can pick you up tomorrow, Roger said, trying to offer some reassurance. It's 17 stitches, Roger. Not a liver transplant, Jocelyn replied, her voice laced with a mix of pain and sarcasm. Who did this, Jose? Roger asked, his concern for her overriding his anger. Jocelyn's response was sharp and immediate. You know I can't discuss my patients with you. Roger nodded, deciding not to push further. I have to fly tomorrow, Jose. That I can't help. But after that, I'm taking a leave of absence. Roger extended his hand, intending to offer comfort by resting it on Jocelyn's leg. The moment his fingers approached, she flinched away violently, her body tensing as if his touch might burn her skin. Her reaction stung him, a physical manifestation of the growing chasm between them. He studied her face, searching for even the faintest trace of the connection they once shared. Her eyes, usually so expressive, remained deliberately averted, fixed on some indeterminate point in the distance. The subtle tremble of her lower lip betrayed the emotional battle raging beneath her composed exterior. Roger recognized the fortress of solitude she had built around herself. Whatever demons tormented her consciousness, she had chosen to face them alone. With a resigned sigh, he withdrew, respecting her unspoken request for space. The soft click of the door, as he departed, echoed with finality in the hollow silence between them. Chapter 3: Shadows of Trauma. The blinds were drawn tight, casting the hospital room into a gloomy twilight. Jocelyn sat on the edge of her bed, her body tense and alert. The sudden swing of the door made her snap around, her eyes wide with apprehension. It was Nurse Kathy who entered, her uniform crisp and her smile as warm as the sunlight she was about to let in. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Eberly," Nurse Kathy greeted cheerfully, setting a tray down on a nearby stand with a gentle clink of china. Jocelyn remained silent, her gaze fixed warily on Nurse Kathy's movements. The nurse, unfazed by the lack of response, continued with a light-hearted tone. "I may not be a doctor, Mrs. Eberly, but I think you're suffering from an acute sunshine deficiency." She then moved towards the window, her hands reaching for the cord to lift the blinds. "And there's only one way to treat that condition. Leave it." Jocelyn's voice cut through the room, sharp and commanding. Startled, Nurse Kathy spun around, her expression momentarily faltering before she regained her composure. She quickly retrieved 2 paper cups from the tray and extended them towards Jocelyn. Reluctantly, Jocelyn took them, one containing water, the other holding 2 small pills. Nurse Kathy watched Jocelyn's suspicious gaze linger over the medication. "Amoxicillin. A basic antibiotic," she explained calmly. "Remember, that knife was sitting in some man's gastric juices." Standing patiently at the foot of the bed, Nurse Kathy waited as Jocelyn raised the cup of pills to her lips, quickly following with a gulp of water. She handed the empty cups back to the nurse. "I'll let you know when your husband arrives, Mrs. Eberly," Nurse Kathy said before trotting out of the room, the door clicking shut behind her. The moment she was alone, Jocelyn leaned to her left, spitting out the pills and water onto the floor. Her hand shot out towards the tissue box, grabbing a handful, and frantically wiping the inside of her mouth, desperate to remove any trace of the medication. The Eberly residence was a modest home, nearly indistinguishable from its neighbors in the suburban enclave. An SUV pulled into the driveway, and Roger and Jocelyn stepped out. Their ride home had been steeped in a heavy silence, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. That night, in the kitchen of their home, Roger and Jocelyn sat at the dinner table. The clinking of silverware and the sound of chewing filled the room, amplifying the palpable tension between them. Jocelyn picked at her food absent-mindedly, her fork pushing peas around her plate. Her eyes drifted downward to find Plato, her Scottish terrier, scratching at his collar. With a gentle motion, she reached down, pulling Plato close to her. She held him tightly, as if the small dog could protect her from an unseen threat. Later, in their bedroom, Jocelyn lay curled up in a fetal position on her side of the bed, facing away from Roger. The sheets barely moved with her shallow breaths. Roger, lying awake on his back, stared at the ceiling, his mind wrestling with the distance that had grown between them. "What happened, Jose?" Roger's voice broke the silence, laced with a mixture of concern and frustration. Jocelyn's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Something I said must have set him off somehow. Provoked him." Roger cut her off, his tone sharp. "I'm not talking about yesterday. You've gone cold these past months. I tell myself a wife doesn't just wake up one morning and look at her husband like he's a stranger who's walked in off the streets without having her reasons. I just want to know what they are." Her eyes welled up, shimmering with unshed tears, her lips quivering as if on the brink of a confession. But Jocelyn remained silent, her words trapped behind a barrier of fear and pain. Roger exhaled a dispirited sigh, the weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing down on him. He turned onto his side, giving her his back, the distance between them now a chasm filled with unsaid words and unresolved emotions. Chapter 4: The Silent Pool. Morning light filled the kitchen of the Eberly residence, casting a warm glow over the countertops. The steady drip of the coffee maker provided a comforting background rhythm. Jocelyn, barefoot, crossed the tiled floor, a bowl of dog food balanced in her hands. She approached the sliding glass door that opened onto the backyard, and slid it open, the morning breeze brushing against her. Upstairs, in the bedroom, Roger gradually stirred from sleep. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his shirtless back revealing a map of rubbery scar tissue, remnants of his past. The morning sun peeked through the curtains, signaling the start of another day. Dressed now, Roger entered the kitchen, his steps quiet on the linoleum. He reached for the coffee pot, pouring the steaming brew into a mug emblazoned with the Cardinals logo. As he lifted the mug to his lips, he noticed the absence of his wife. "Jose," he called out, his voice a gentle question that echoed slightly in the quiet house. Receiving no answer, he moved towards the sliding glass door, stepping out into the backyard. The air was fresh, tinged with the scent of dew and blooming flowers. Roger's gaze swept across the porch, landing on Plato, their dog, who was busily nibbling on spilled kibble beside the in-ground pool. Roger approached the pool, his heart quickening as he noticed a figure floating face down in the water. Jocelyn's hair spread out around her like an ink spill, motionless and eerily still. Panic surged through him as he leapt into the pool, the water splashing around him. He frantically turned Jocelyn over, brushing her hair aside to reveal her clouded eyes staring blankly at the sky. A sob caught in his throat as he lifted her out of the water, laying her gently on the lawn. Desperation fueled his movements as he began performing mouth to mouth, his hands pressing rhythmically against her chest in a futile attempt to summon a pulse. Plato watched from a distance, his eyes solemn, as Roger continued his desperate efforts to resuscitate Jocelyn, even though he knew deep down it was all in vain. Roger sat in the visitor's chair of the medical examiner's office, his face a portrait of raw, freshly widowered devastation. His gaze drifted to the many family photographs cluttering the desk, each snapshot a cruel reminder of the life he had been deprived of. The door opened, and Dr. Nethercutt entered. In his 50s, he was as cold and clinical as his profession demanded. He held a file in his hand and took a seat behind the desk. "You understand this is a deviation from protocol, Mr. Eberly," Dr. Nethercutt began. "Normally, those on staff here with experience in grief counseling are tasked with cause-of-death disclosures. I'm not the one who usually speaks with the next of kin." "All due respect, Dr. Nethercutt," Roger interjected. "I don't care how unseemly your bedside manner is. I just want to know how my wife died." Dr. Nethercutt nodded, slipping on his reading glasses to consult the file. The victim suffered an acute cerebral infarction. A severe stroke, in other words. "But that's not how she died." Roger's voice was tense, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "An internal examination revealed the presence of large quantities of water in her lungs," Dr. Nethercutt explained. "Your wife drowned, Mr. Eberly." Roger paused, the weight of the words settling over him like a shroud. "Was she conscious? Aware?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid it's difficult to determine her mental acuity at the time of her death," the doctor replied, his tone unchanging. Roger's eyes locked onto Dr. Nethercutt's, a silent accusation in his gaze. She was healthy. She had no family history of stroke. What happened? "In my experience, Mr. Eberly, it's not the murders or drug overdoses that prove to be the most difficult for the bereaved to come to terms with," Dr. Nethercutt said, his voice softening slightly. "It's the freak accidents. The people who drown in their bathtubs or choke to death in their porterhouses. Death and closure are not always a package deal." Chapter 5: Grave Secrets. The service had long concluded, yet Roger remained at the front of the expansive arrangement room, holding a solitary vigil over his wife's casket. Behind him, the funeral director checked his watch, the soft click of the stem betraying his impatience. He approached Roger, his face schooled into a facade of compassionate understanding. "I hope we were able to honor your wife's wishes today, Mr. Eberly," the funeral director said, his voice smooth and measured. Roger's gaze remained fixed ahead, his eyes vacant and distant. Without turning around, he asked, "Looking to pack it up soon?" The funeral director, caught off guard, settled sheepishly into a chair behind Roger, attempting to salvage the moment with a consoling tone. "My mother-in-law died of a stroke too," he began, his words a gentle murmur in the quiet space. "She was staying with my wife and me at the time. I was bringing her a bowl of puffed rice when one found her. She was so still. They call it a decorticate response. The body turns rigid, like a mannequin. But I thought she was just asleep." He paused, then continued, "My point is, Mr. Eberly, when you've been a funeral director for as long as I have, you learn to appreciate a peaceful passing." A flicker of light, dim and nearly extinguished, sparked to life in Roger's eyes. Suddenly, he shot up from his seat and rushed over to his wife's casket. With a swift motion, He flipped open the lower door, his hands tracing the contours of his wife's legs, searching for something he couldn't see. The funeral director watched Roger with a perplexed look, his brows furrowed in confusion. "We've inventoried all the personal items your wife is to be committed with. If you wish to see a list—" "She wasn't stiff when I found her," Roger interrupted, his voice a low growl, as he continued his tactile inspection, moving to his wife's arms. "She was a goddamn rag doll." Roger's hands moved to Jocelyn's neck, pausing at the nape. He tilted her head forward, his fingers pressing against a patch of skin that creased unnaturally beneath his touch. Probing further, he found a flap and gently peeled it back, revealing synthetic tissue grafted to Jocelyn's skin. Beneath the artificial layer, a small but unmistakable injection puncture mark marred her flesh. Quitting time at the medical examiner's office, Dr. Nethercutt locked his office door behind him. As he turned, he found himself face to face with Roger. Momentarily taken aback, Dr. Nethercutt quickly hardened his expression. "Mr. Eberly, any matters concerning your wife's?" Dr. Nethercutt began, but Roger cut him off sharply. "She's in the car," Roger interjected, his voice tense. Dr. Nethercutt's brow creased, uncertain if he had heard correctly. "Come again?" he asked, seeking clarification. In the waiting room, Roger sat rigid and impatient. He sprang to his feet the moment Dr. Nethercutt entered, dressed in green scrubs and surgical gloves, his demeanor humbled by the recent discovery he had made. "You know, Mr. Eberly, I once had a woman in my office whose husband died in a car accident," Dr. Nethercutt began, taking a seat across from Roger. "Since most of what we were able to recover of him was fused to the engine block of his Lamborghini, I suggested, as delicately as one can, that she cremate his remains. She nodded politely, requested the name of another physician for a second opinion, and then asked if she could speak with her husband." He paused, allowing the absurdity of the situation to sink in. "When I saw you tonight, I thought grief had completely divorced you from reality," Dr. Nethercutt continued, meeting Roger's intense gaze. "However, there does appear to be an injection site in your wife's posterior neck tissue, with puncture tracking, suggesting something was administered directly into her brainstem, perhaps using an intraosseous injection gun." Roger processed this new information, his mind racing. "What was she injected with?" he demanded, his voice strained with urgency. "A compound whose pharmacological properties I'm unable to readily identify," Dr. Nethercutt admitted. "But I can run a trace analysis. It will take some time, though. I would suggest you go home and wait for my phone call, but I can see already you won't abide by that." He sighed, resigned to the situation. "So I'll call my wife, tell her to leave my pot roast in the oven. Meanwhile, I'll need you to pick me up a double large coffee. This machine needs greasing." Roger approached the front counter of the dimly lit gas station mini-mart, 2 steaming coffees in hand. The clerk, with eyes that seemed to reflect the monotony of his shift, rang up the purchase. "$3.50, the clerk intoned, his voice as flat as the fluorescent light above. Roger reached into his wallet, fingers brushing against the worn leather. As he pulled out a few bills, his gaze fell on the photo nestled in the clear plastic sleeve. It was Jocelyn, his late wife, captured in a moment of pure joy, her smile as vibrant as the sunlight that once bathed her in a hammock during their happier days. The image drew him in, anchoring him to a past that felt both distant and immediate. The clerk's voice cut through Roger's reverie, tinged now with slight impatience. "It's still $3.50, sir." Jolted back to the present, Roger handed over the money, his movements automatic. He collected his change, but before he could pocket it, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Turning towards the sound, he watched through the grimy windows as a fire truck raced by, its lights slashing through the darkness. A second followed, then a third, their procession a chilling omen. With a sudden urgency, Roger abandoned the coffees on the counter and rushed out of the mini-mart, his mind reeling from the sight and the memories it stirred. Roger arrived at the medical examiner's office under the cover of night, his car coming to a halt with a soft crunch of gravel. As he stepped out, his heart sank at the sight before him. The building was engulfed in flames, an inferno that licked at the night sky. Firemen were battling the blaze, wielding high-pressure hoses that seemed to do little more than provoke the fire's fury. Horror gripped Roger as he approached the burning structure, his steps quickening with desperation. The firemen, absorbed in their struggle against the raging flames, didn't notice him until he was nearly inside the inferno. They reacted swiftly, chasing after him and pulling him back from the perilous threshold. In their haste to secure Roger, they abandoned a hose that now lay on the ground, writhing and hissing like a decapitated snake. A block away, a nondescript car idled at the curb. Inside, the arsonist watched, unseen save for his blistered hands gripping the steering wheel. Acid washes had stripped off the epidermis, leaving both his palms and fingertips without any identifiable friction ridges. The arsonist turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and drove off, leaving behind the chaos. Meanwhile, firemen continued to grapple with Roger, their grips firm and unyielding as they wrestled him to the ground. Roger's head smacked against a retracted sprinkler head, the impact sharp and sudden. His world spiraled into darkness, the last sounds he heard being the distant wail of sirens and the heavy breaths of the men pinning him down. Chapter 6: Burning Truths. Cordoned off with yellow tape, the pre-dawn light revealed the flame-blackened husk of the medical examiner's office. Firemen sifted through the smoking rubble, searching for any shred of evidence that might explain the devastation. Parked out front, an ambulance awaited, its doors open to the somber scene. Inside the ambulance, Roger slowly regained consciousness, struggling to sit upright on the stretcher. A bandage covered the back of his head, a testament to the blow he had received. A paramedic and a plainclothes detective, Pollock, stood over him. The paramedic, seeing Roger's eyes flutter open, spoke first. "Easy there, Mr. Eberly. You took a serious blow to the head. Now see if you can follow my penlight." The paramedic began waving a penlight in front of Roger's eyes, but Roger's gaze remained fixed on the paramedic's face, ignoring the light. "Where is she?" Roger's voice was hoarse, filled with an urgency that cut through the clinical calm of the ambulance. The paramedic tucked the penlight away and glanced at Pollock, who took over. "We believe we've found your wife's remains, Mr. Eberly." "You believe?" Roger's tone sharpened, a mix of desperation and disbelief. Pollock responded with considerable tact. "I'm afraid the fire didn't leave much intact." "And Dr. Nethercutt?" Roger pressed, his mind racing through the possible scenarios. "There is a second body. We're fairly certain it's his." "What caused this?" Roger's eyes searched Pollock's face for any sign of deception. "We're still looking into that. But preliminary findings indicate this to be an electrical fire. Maybe an overloaded circuit. Faulty wiring. Something to that effect." As the full implications of what might be happening began to dawn on him, Roger's voice took on a premonitory tone. "I'm sure your people will turn up something." Pollock seemed thrown by Roger's cryptic response. He reached into his jacket and produced a padded envelope, extending it toward Roger. "Most of your wife's personal effects were unsalvageable, but we were able to recover her wedding ring." Keeping his emotions at bay, Roger accepted the envelope as if it were a folded flag, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around it. "If we need anything else, we'll call you, Mr. Eberly. And make sure you get yourself looked after. You sustained some serious head trauma." As Pollock began to walk away, Roger's voice stopped him. "Detective?" Pollock turned back. Roger's eyes met the detective's, a storm of conflict and debate swirling within them. He was torn about whether to disclose his suspicions to Pollock. "Yes." Pollock waited, his expression one of readiness to listen. A hanging beat passed between them. "Someone should call the doctor's wife," Roger said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of shared loss. Pollock nodded in simpatico and continued on his way. The paramedic moved in to help Roger lie back down on the stretcher. "I apologize, Mr. Eberly, but it's absolutely vital we get you to a hospital right away for an MRI. So if you could just lie back down." But Roger pushed the paramedic off him. The paramedic tumbled to the floor, knocking over medical supplies in his fall. Ignoring the pleas and the scattered equipment, Roger exited the ambulance, driven by a resolve that no hospital visit could delay. "At least let me give you an anti-inflammatory, Mr. Eberly," the paramedic called after him. But Roger's steps did not falter as he made his way from the scene, the morning light casting long shadows across his path. Roger eased his car to a stop alongside Jocelyn's BMW in the Eberly residence driveway. The familiar sight of her car, now cold and empty, twisted the knife of loss deeper into his heart. Inside his own vehicle, he sat behind the wheel, his thoughts adrift in a sea of sorrow. His gaze fell upon the envelope resting on the passenger seat, the last vestiges of Jocelyn. His fingers reached out, trembling like leaves in a storm to open it, but he recoiled as if touching a hot stove. The contents of the envelope were too much to bear, her specter hanging over them like a shroud. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. With a renewed sense of purpose seething within him, Roger shifted his car into reverse and backed out of the driveway. In Sidney Jurgen's office at Pilgrim Crossing, Roger faced his old friend across the desk. Sidney toyed with a fountain pen, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief as he addressed Roger. "I won't even entertain what you're suggesting," Sidney said, his voice firm. "I'm not suggesting, I'm asking. I just need 5 uninterrupted minutes with this guy, Sidney," Roger insisted, his tone laced with desperation. "Good God, Roger, do you even hear yourself? You're asking to speak with a highly disturbed patient. There haven't been many qualified physicians I've let near Bodeker over the years. Let alone a man harboring a personal vendetta," Sidney retorted, his eyes narrowing. "There's no vendetta, Sidney. This man didn't kill my wife," Roger replied, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "You don't honestly think Jocelyn's death was the result of foul play?" Sidney asked, his skepticism palpable. Roger skirted the question, his voice softening. "He was one of the last people to speak with my wife. And truth be told, Sidney, Jose and I weren't communicating all that much the past few months." He paused, the weight of his grief evident in the silence that followed. "I just want closure." Seeing how grief-stricken Roger was, Sidney's expression softened, and the hard lines of his face relaxed into a look of understanding and compassion. Chapter 7: The Cell's Whisper. Sidney affixed fabricated credentials to the lapel of Roger's jacket, his fingers deftly securing the imposter label in place. "You're on sabbatical, conducting research for your new book. You don't speak to the patients. You don't make direct eye contact with the patients. Do you understand?" Sidney instructed, his tone brooking no argument. Roger nodded, prompting Sidney to continue. "Good. Because you know what happens if the board finds out I brought a civilian beyond this point. You take a job as a high school guidance counselor?" Roger quipped, a half smile playing on his lips. "More like a high school janitor," Sidney retorted, his face devoid of amusement. He removed a card from his pocket, swiping it through a reader. After punching in a code on the alphanumeric keypad, the door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. Sidney pushed it open, ushering Roger into a new world. They entered a high-security wing at Pilgrim Crossing. A small enclosure, reminiscent of a subway booth, flanked the door. 2 metal carrier trays protruded like deposit boxes. Through the glass, Orderly One addressed them, his voice muffled but authoritative. "Please place all personal effects and metal objects in the tray." Complying silently, Roger and Sidney emptied their pockets and removed their belts. The trays retracted, and Orderly Two approached with a metal detector wand. He scanned Sidney first, the wand gliding smoothly over him without a sound. When he turned to Roger, the wand squawked at the top of his neck, drawing attention to the scars on his still bandaged head, resembling seams of caulking glue. "Bad biking accident," Roger improvised, his voice unconvincing. Orderly Two responded with a dubious glare, then directed, "Keep outside of the red line," nodding to the red line marking the corridor like a safety marker on a train platform. As they followed the red line, plexiglass cubes within recessed alcoves lined their path, housing patients. The first they passed was an obese man with asymmetrical eyes that orbited involuntarily, chuckling to himself on his bed. The second, a shirtless man with stringy hair, genuflected in his cell's corner, murmuring prayers in an unknown tongue. Sidney halted at the third cell, where Edmund Bodeker lay on his bed, his back to them. Even at rest, Bodeker seemed restless, like a shark always moving. "I can't guarantee he'll even want to talk to you," Sydney warned, before activating the intercom embedded in the annealed glass. The acoustics within Edmund's cell amplified. "Edmund, you have a visitor," Sydney announced. Edmund remained motionless, like a wax figure in a diorama. Turning to Roger, Sydney set the timer. "You have 5 minutes." He walked away, leaving Roger to face Edmund alone. Stepping forward, Roger spoke into the intercom. "Edmund, my name is Roger Eberly. I was hoping to speak with you." Edmund shifted, rising from his bed to reveal a plaster cast where his right hand once was. He approached, sizing Roger up, and with a menacing smile remarked, "And how is your wife, Mr. Eberly?" The proximity to Edmund would have daunted most, but Roger held his ground, meeting the killer's incisive gaze. "She's dead," he stated bluntly. Unfazed, Edmund offered mock sympathy. "You have my sincerest condolences. Now, what do you want from me?" "I want to know why you attacked her. Why did you try to kill her?" Roger demanded, his voice laced with barely restrained fury. After a charged pause, Edmund responded with chilling nonchalance. "Are you familiar with my work, Mr. Eberly? Your wife would have made a lovely addition to my portfolio. What I could have done with such a canvas." Alas, your wife's survival instinct, her situational awareness was, shall we say, acute. Roger processed this, a dark realization dawning. "They came to you, didn't they? Whoever it was, they wanted her dead and they contracted you. Don't paint me in that light, Mr. Eberly." "I'm not some button man," Edmund retorted, his voice still eerily cordial. "Yeah. You're something they don't have a name for. You're a fucking—" Roger's words were cut short as Edmund smashed his truncated arm against the glass, sending Roger stumbling back. With his cast, Edmund painted a dripping crimson circle around Roger's face on the glass, declaring, "I'm an artist." Sydney returned, pulling at Roger's arm. "All right, let's go, Roger." Caught in the magnetic pull of Edmund's maniacal eyes, Roger didn't respond initially. Only when Sydney yanked harder did Roger snap around, his defensive instincts flaring. Sydney recoiled slightly but recovered, guiding Roger's attention to the high-angled surveillance dome above them. In the surveillance room, banks of monitors lined the walls, capturing every angle within Pilgrim Crossing. Roger and Sydney watched as a security tech retrieved an orange waterproof case from a rack of similar containers. "We archive all surveillance footage onto hard drive. They're backlogged by month," the security tech explained, selecting a hard drive and inserting it into a toaster drive dock connected to a computer. On the monitor, folders marked by date appeared. "Go to the night before my wife's attack. Bodeker's cell," Roger instructed. Sydney directed the security tech to the appropriate folder, which revealed subfolders marked by location. "High security wing. Anything close to cell 3B, Sydney specified. The security tech clicked into the folder, but only static played on the monitor. "That's weird," he muttered, trying another folder with similar results. He cycled through all footage from that day, finding nothing but snow across the screens. Turning to Roger and Sydney, he concluded, "Looks like all our cameras were out that day." Sydney looked quizzical, but Roger's expression hardened. His suspicions were confirmed, and the gravity of what he faced sank deeper into his resolve. Chapter 8: Echoes in the Dark. Roger stormed into the bedroom of their home, his arms laden with a cardboard box filled with Jocelyn's office belongings. He heaved it onto the bed, the contents spilling out as he began to rummage through them. Files, legal pads, all in search of something, anything that might explain her sudden absence. Next, he moved to the closet, his movements methodical yet tinged with desperation. He sifted through shoeboxes and scanned the shelves, hoping to uncover a hidden clue among her possessions. In the living room, Roger sat in front of the home computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he delved into Jocelyn's digital life. He navigated through her folders, scrutinized her browsing history, and even resorted to using spousal infidelity software to hack into her email. Despite his efforts, he found nothing, no trace of why she had vanished. Hours later, exhaustion weighed heavily on Roger. He slumped in front of the now inactive computer, his head resting in his hands, a picture of defeat. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life, a slideshow of memories beginning to play. Roger lifted his head, his gaze fixed on the images that danced across the screen. There was a snapshot of him leaving a rehabilitation clinic, Jocelyn by his side, her eyes brimming with proud tears as he took his first unaided steps down the stairs. Another image showed them bundled up together on a ski lift, their faces flushed with cold and laughter. And then, a photo of Jocelyn holding their dog, Plato, up to the camera, her smile radiant. As Roger watched the slideshow, his eyes reddened with unshed tears. But then a shift occurred within him, a sudden clarity cutting through his grief. He sprang into action, navigating to the desktop preferences and then to the screensaver settings, scrolling through the stored photos until he reached the image of Jocelyn with Plato. Something in the picture caught his attention, Plato's collar. It looked different from the one the dog wore now. Turning in his chair, Roger found Plato and gently pulled him into his lap. With careful fingers, he removed the current collar and inspected its lining. There, hidden inside an open seam, he discovered a flash drive. Roger's eyes widened in shock and curiosity as he extracted the drive. He extended the A-plug, ready to insert it into the computer, but hesitated. A sense of caution overtook him, and he decided against using the home computer for this potentially crucial piece of evidence. Roger sat in the public library's computer lab, a spacious room compartmentalized by partitions, each section housing a computer terminal. He occupied one of these workstations, his fingers deftly navigating as he inserted a thumb drive into the USB port. The device blinked to life, its icon materializing on the screen. With a click, Roger delved into the drive, uncovering a series of audio files, each tagged with a date, the most recent from 3 months prior. He donned his headphones and selected the earliest file, immersing himself in its contents. As the audio began to play, all external sound faded away, leaving Roger to focus intently. The recording captured the subtle sounds of a door opening, the squeak of wheels scraping against the linoleum floor, and the metallic clinking of some unidentifiable mechanism. Then, amidst these ambient noises, a voice broke through. "If we could, Daryl, I would like to pick up where we left off last session," Jocelyn's voice came through clearly. "If you remember, we were discussing the floating man." Roger's hand moved swiftly to a notepad, where he scribbled down Daryl and punctuated it with a question mark. Daryl's reply had the clipped tone of a soldier, yet it carried undertones of delirium. "I haven't forgotten. You said you could see him, but not his face. Why is that?" Jocelyn pressed. "There was this light behind him. So bright. I remember wanting to blink, but I couldn't close my eyes. I had to watch him," Daryl responded, his voice straining with the memory. "Is there anything else you can remember? Anything at all?" Jocelyn's voice was gentle, coaxing. In response, Daryl's voice trembled, morphing into a haunting melody. He hummed "The Ants Go Marching," the tune sending shivers down Roger's spine before dissolving into a sorrowful sob. "You're safe here, Daryl. You can tell me. Did he hurt you?" Jocelyn's tone was reassuring, yet firm. "He saved me," Daryl's voice hardened, the shift stark against the backdrop of his earlier vulnerability. Later, Roger reviewed his notes. His pad was crowded with hastily written lines and question marks interspersed throughout his scribbles. Some, including the one next to Daryl's name, had been crossed out as Roger pieced together the puzzle from the fragments of conversation he'd uncovered. On the monitor, a news article detailing the life of Daryl Lee Unger filled the browser page. Roger scanned the excerpts, absorbing the grim details. The man responsible for the courthouse shooting that left 16 dead, including Senator Bob Devereux. Another section mentioned Unger to undergo a psychiatric evaluation to determine his mental fitness to stand trial. A final note highlighted, dishonorably discharged for reasons undisclosed. At the top of the page, a stark booking photo captured Daryl's visage, his head shorn, his eyes deeply recessed. Rather than menacing, Daryl's expression seemed lost, a man adrift in his own turmoil. Roger, with headphones draped around his neck, navigated away to another article. A chilling image greeted him, An overturned bus at the bottom of a ravine, accompanied by the headline, "Prison Transport Bus Crashes. Courthouse Shooter Daryl Lee Unger Pronounced Dead on the Scene." Hours later, Roger listened intently to the final audio entries recorded less than a week before Daryl's death. Jocelyn's voice, professional yet probing, filled his ears. "You were a good soldier, weren't you, Daryl?" "I am a good soldier," Daryl clarified, his voice steady. "Then why were you dishonorably discharged?" Jocelyn pressed. "It wasn't dishonorable. It was other than honorable," Daryl corrected. "They revoked your medical benefits and barred you from re-enlisting in any branch of the armed services. Would you agree, this is not how you treat a good soldier, Daryl?" Jocelyn's tone sharpened, striking a nerve evident in Daryl's increasingly rapid breathing. Casting aside all protocol and professionalism, Jocelyn continued, "Do you remember speaking to anyone on the phone prior to the shooting? Or seeing anything on TV?" Roger could hear the struggle in Daryl's breaths as he tried to regain control. Jocelyn pressed on, her voice persistent. "How did they activate you, Daryl? What was your triggering sequence?" The sound of Daryl's wheelchair trembling grew louder, his breathing accelerating with each question. Then Jocelyn mentioned, "The floating man, was he the one who ran the disciple program?" A sudden quiet followed. When Daryl spoke again, his voice carried an eerie calm. "I've said all I wish to say on this matter, Dr. Eberly." The recording ended abruptly. Roger scribbled "the disciple program" onto his notepad, a question mark trailing behind the words. Curiosity piqued, Roger opened a new browser window and typed in the phrase. The load bar on Roger's screen began to fill, its progress accompanied by the artifacts and distortions of overlapping status windows. Suddenly, an error message popped up, halting the process abruptly. To his right, a groan drew his attention. Roger peeked around the partition and saw a disgruntled student, his eyes fixed on the identical error message displayed on his own monitor. The air filled with a chorus of complaints, rising to a crescendo that echoed through the room. Roger stood up, his gaze scanning the room to confirm that every computer was frozen, each screen mirroring the same frustrating error message. In the center of the turmoil, a librarian stepped forward, attempting to quell the rising discontent among the students. "I'm sorry, folks," the librarian announced, her voice barely rising above the din. "It appears we're experiencing a system failure." With a quick glance at his surroundings, Roger snatched his flash drive from the USB port. His movements were hurried yet cautious, fully aware of the surveillance cameras perched in the upper corners of the computer lab. He made his way toward the door, eager to escape the chaos and the watchful eyes of the cameras. Chapter 9: Voices of Control. Roger hurried into the main foyer of the Eberly residence, his fingers deftly punching in the code on the alarm panel to disarm it. Just as he was about to rearm the system, the sharp ring of the phone cut through the silence. He grabbed the cordless from its charging cradle and pressed it to his ear. "Hello," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty house. The line responded with a low, persistent drone, devoid of any voice or breath. Roger strained to listen, the silence on the other end amplifying his suspicion that someone was there, listening intently. "Hello," he repeated, the static crackling in response. "I'll be here all night," Roger declared firmly into the phone before hanging up. With determined strides, he marched upstairs. In the second-floor hallway, just outside his bedroom door, Roger set to work with a slate bar and power drill. He loosened the floorboards, the task familiar and precise. Tossing the tools aside, he stepped forward to test his handiwork. The wood creaked underfoot, a sound more discreet yet just as effective as a string of tin cans would have been. Inside the high-security wing of Pilgrim Crossing, a surveillance dome dangled from the ceiling like a swollen droplet of sweat. Its red recording light flickered off, plunging the cell into a deeper silence. Edmund, roused by an animalistic instinct, sat bolt upright in his bed. His gaze pierced the darkness, fixating on the shadows lurking beyond the glass of his cell. "It's after visiting hours," he muttered to himself, the silence offering no reply, leaving him conversing with the ghosts of his own mind. "Van Gogh was not recognized as a great artist until after his death," he continued, his voice a whisper lost in the sterile confines of his prison. One day, the historians will revisit my work. His musings were abruptly severed by a sharp sting in his stomach. A hypodermic dart had found its mark, embedding itself into his flesh. Edmund's eyes dropped to the projectile, a smirk playing on his lips as a dark amusement flickered across his features. Then, with a heavy sigh, he slumped forward, lifeless. The cold, stray moonlight that seeped through the small window caught on a thin, high-tensile wire connected to the dart, resembling a strand of arachnid silk. As it tightened, it began to retract, pulling the dart from Edmund's body as effortlessly as a fisherman reeling in a catch. The wire guided the dart back through the open food slot of the cell, where it nestled back into the barrel of a mid-range projector rifle. The hands that gripped the weapon were briefly illuminated by a shaft of light, revealing soft skin and manicured nails, a stark contrast to the violence they had just enacted. Roger sat at the foot of his bed in the Eberly residence, his eyes locked on the closed bedroom door with the unblinking focus of a soldier on guard duty. His hand, concealed beneath a pillow, gripped the Beretta tightly, the safety off, his finger caressing the trigger with a deadly familiarity. Outside, in the moonlit backyard, the central air conditioning unit stood ominously still. Its side panel had been forcibly pried open, revealing the dark innards. A hose, snaked from a portable tank, connected directly to the compressor, secretly ventilating the house with an unknown aerosolized agent. The arsonist's hand, its fingers intertwined with raw sinew, appeared from the shadows, reaching down to tighten the valve on the tank, stemming the flow of gas into the system. Back in the bedroom, the floorboards outside the door creaked ominously. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door swung open to reveal the arsonist, his face obscured by a gas mask with tinted lenses. He stepped inside cautiously, his boots silent on the carpet. His gaze fell upon Roger, who now lay sprawled and unconscious across the bed. The arsonist's eyes then shifted upward, catching the sight of the air duct above. Moving with purpose, the arsonist approached Roger, flipping him onto his stomach with a rough shove. From his belt, he drew an injection gun, its metal gleaming coldly in the dim light. He positioned the device against the nape of Roger's neck, and with a swift motion, triggered the retractable needle. It shot out with a hiss, penetrating Roger's skin with clinical precision. Chapter 10: The Desert Trap. The night air was crisp on the desert promontory, the terrain below bathed in the milky glow of a bejeweled sky. From the ridge, the distant lights of Pilgrim Crossing flickered like distant stars. 50 yards from the edge of a sheer 70-foot drop, Jocelyn's BMW stood parked, a dark silhouette against the rugged landscape. Inside the car, the arsonist, with the hardened countenance of an ex-military man, busied himself with an unconscious Roger. He maneuvered Roger into the driver's seat, his movements precise and practiced. As he leaned down to snap the seatbelt, his hand paused mid-motion. Roger's eyes were open, alert, and fixed directly on him. The arsonist recoiled in surprise, his back slamming against the steering wheel. The horn blared, its sound echoing across the moonlit expanse. "Fuck are you doing in there?" A woman's voice called out from somewhere outside the car. The arsonist, unnerved by Roger's wide-eyed yet eerily still gaze, muttered to himself, "He's looking right at me." The sound of approaching footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Nurse Kathy appeared, leaning down into the open driver's side door. Gone was her usual facade of kindness. Her black attire and hair twisted back in a tight ponytail gave her a severe, almost menacing look. Roger's eyes slowly rolled in their sockets until they found Nurse Kathy. Her expression was nonchalant, a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. "He can hear us too," Nurse Kathy said, her voice cool and clinical. "You dosed him with a very potent neuromuscular blocker, but without anesthetic properties. He'll feel everything." She paused, then added with a chilling nonchalance, "Let's fix him a scotch." What followed was executed with swift, methodical precision, a tandem maneuver that spoke of practice, not rehearsal. The arsonist removed the catheter tubing. With the efficiency of someone well acquainted with the process, he inserted a surgical mouth prop and began feeding the siphon down Roger's throat. Roger's body jerked and twitched in response, his mind a prisoner to the paralytic drug coursing through his veins. "Make sure you're in the stomach," Nurse Kathy instructed, her words slicing through the tense air. "It won't have the desired effect if the toxicologist finds a pint of booze in his lungs." Once the intubation was complete, the arsonist handed the end of the tubing to Nurse Kathy. She calmly removed a can of gas duster, slipping the nozzle into the tubing. The arsonist pressed his ear against Roger's stomach, listening intently. "Ready?" Nurse Kathy asked. The arsonist nodded in affirmation. With a steady hand, Nurse Kathy sprayed. Inside Roger, the arsonist heard the faint burst of canned air against the stomach lining. "We're in there," he confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. Nurse Kathy carefully affixed a funnel to the top of the tubing, lifting her arm to ensure the tubing was perfectly straight. With precise movements, she retrieved an 18-year-old Glenlivet from a nearby duffel bag, breaking the seal and uncorking it with a soft pop. "He was saving this for a special occasion," she remarked, a hint of irony in her voice. She tilted the bottle, allowing the amber liquid to flow smoothly into the funnel. The scotch cascaded down the tubing, a reverse of the stomach-pumping process, filling Roger's stomach with its rich warmth. He let out a guttural choke as the liquor hit his system, the sensation both shocking and strangely comforting. After nearly a third of the bottle had been emptied into him, Nurse Kathy declared, "That should do." With the efficiency of a seasoned professional, she detached the funnel. Beside her, the arsonist began to withdraw the tubing from Roger's body, pulling it out in a motion reminiscent of a magician extracting an endless string of handkerchiefs. Nurse Kathy instructed Roger to apply the cosmetics. The arsonist tucked the coiled tubing inside his jacket and exited the vehicle, shuffling into the back seat. Nurse Kathy leaned in, spilling scotch onto Roger and the dashboard, then tossed the bottle into the footwell. In the back seat, the arsonist removed a small makeup kit containing a patch of adhesive artificial skin, the same cosmetic concealment Roger had found on Jocelyn's neck. He reached to remove the driver's seat headrest, but paused, inspecting the injection site in Roger's neck more closely through the headrest's hollow contour. Up front, Nurse Kathy noticed Roger's fastened seatbelt and muttered in frustration, "Goddammit, would a man about to drive off a cliff really buckle up?" She leaned down, reaching to release the buckle. Still curious, the arsonist expanded the injection mark in Roger's neck with his fingers, revealing an impenetrable steel plate under the skin like a silver sequin. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the injection gun, and triggered it, only to find the needle bent at a perpendicular angle. "He isn't dosed," the arsonist exclaimed. Leaned in close, Kathy turned to face Roger and found his eyes ablaze. A heavy silence filled the air. Nurse Kathy reached for her handgun, but Roger swiftly caught her wrist with one hand and cranked his seat's reclining mechanism with the other. The driver's seat dropped back sharply, pinning the arsonist and fracturing his nose with the headrest. Roger and Nurse Kathy grappled fiercely for control of the gun, their struggle intensified by the urgent flailing of the arsonist behind them. His nose, grotesquely askew and bleeding profusely, painted a vivid picture of chaos. As their arms interlocked, the gun swung wildly toward the arsonist. Their fingers, entwined around the trigger, accidentally discharged the weapon. A bullet struck the arsonist in the head, the impact glazing the back windshield with a sickening varnish of brain matter. Nurse Kathy fought with a feral intensity, her teeth bared as she bit down, gradually aligning the handgun with Roger's temple. Desperation drove Roger to reach blindly for the gear stick with his free hand. Upon finding it, he shifted the car into drive, only to find his foot obstructed by a bottle of scotch lodged behind the gas pedal. With Nurse Kathy gaining the upper hand, she used her full weight to inch the gun closer to Roger's direction. In a desperate bid for control, Roger raised his foot and stomped down hard, shattering the bottle of scotch and flattening the gas pedal. The BMW surged forward, accelerating rapidly toward the precipice of the ridge. Amidst their struggle for the handgun, Nurse Kathy stole a glance out the windshield, her face turning ashen as she realized the ridge's terminus was racing to meet them. Roger, quick to react, secured his seatbelt and braced himself. As the BMW plunged over the edge, he was buoyed by the seatbelt. Everything inside the car, including Nurse Kathy, was gravitationally pulled flush to the roof, resembling aluminum cans caught by a magnetic crane. Chapter 11: Blood and Bonds. The low-lying desert plain was shrouded in the deep cloak of night when the BMW crashed with a force that sent dust swirling into the air. The vehicle's front end crumpled like the bellows of an accordion, its roof concaving as it settled into a smoking, overturned heap amidst the debris. Inside the BMW, the hiss of steam escaped through the vents, and a dangerous puddle of highly combustible motor oil leaked from the ruptured engine block. Roger, bloody and mildly concussed, found himself in an inverted world. The airbag that had cushioned his head slowly deflated, unveiling the ghastly sight of Nurse Kathy, her body a macabre sculpture of bent and broken limbs, twisted into impossible contortions. With effort, Roger unfastened his seatbelt and fell onto the roof. Nurse Kathy watched him, her gaze filled with pain and helplessness as she lay unable to move. Roger regarded her with undisguised contempt. "It was you, wasn't it?" Roger's voice was chilling, the words emerging from a place of deep-seated rage. "You were the one who took her from me." Nurse Kathy, unresponsive, coughed up a gout of blood, her life visibly draining away. "She drowned in 3 feet of water," Roger continued, his voice a dark, infernal echo of his soul's torment. Stretching his arm upward toward the dashboard, he unfastened the GPS unit from its mount and pocketed it. "To die like that, I can think of only one thing worse." His fingers then found the car's electric cigarette lighter, which he depressed. Crawling out from the driver's side entrance of the BMW, Roger left Nurse Kathy's gaze fixed on the lighter, a flicker of dread passing through her eyes. The lighter popped out of its socket, and Nurse Kathy tracked its descent with a mixture of horror and inevitability. The neon coil touched down on the flammable surface of the roof, igniting the oil with a sudden, fierce blaze. Silhouetted against the flickering funeral pyre, Roger's eyes remained fixed on the BMW, as the flames eagerly licked at its sleek curves, gradually engulfing it whole. The dancing shadows cast eerie patterns across his face, a mask of resolve amidst the chaos. In a sudden, deliberate motion, Roger thrust 2 fingers down his throat and knelt forward, forcefully expelling the remnants of single-malt whiskey from his system. The bitter taste mingled with the acrid scent of burning metal, a fitting purge for the night's grim work. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the commercial strip of Foggy Bottom bustled with the energy of a city always on the move. Inside an office complex, an elevator in the lobby opened, revealing a saleswoman, poised and strikingly attractive, likely the beacon of beauty on her floor. As the doors began to close, she expertly extended her arm, halting them just in time for Ambrose to join her. In his mid-40s, Ambrose exuded an effortless, suave demeanor, his appearance fastidiously groomed. He gifted her a smile, his teeth a perfect row of gleaming enamel. "You're an angel," Ambrose complimented smoothly as he stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The doors slid shut, and they began their ascent. "The mysterious 8th floor," the saleswoman remarked, curiosity lacing her tone. "I feel like I hardly ever see anyone going up there." "Vacation season," Ambrose replied with a casual shrug. "Some days, it feels like I'm the only one in the office." "I know that feeling," she nodded empathetically. "So, what do you do up there on the 8th floor?" "I work for the Cypress Group," Ambrose explained. "We're a consulting firm." "A consulting firm?" Her interest piqued. "Clients present us with problems. We provide solutions," he stated, his voice carrying a hint of mystery. The elevator chimed as it reached her floor. Stepping out, the saleswoman turned to Ambrose, her eyes twinkling with playful skepticism. "Well, personally, I don't believe that you work for them." Intrigued by her candor, Ambrose raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" With a coquettish smile playing on her lips, she replied, "You don't strike me as someone who has a boss." As the elevator doors closed, sealing her outside, her words lingered in the air, leaving Ambrose to ponder her assessment as he continued his journey to the 8th floor. The elevator doors parted, revealing the well-furnished reception area of the Cypress Group. Postmodern chairs dotted the space, their sleek lines cutting through the air. Accent-lit paintings cast soft glows against the walls, while a frosted glass barrier separated the reception from the deeper offices beyond. Behind a desk bearing the Cypress Group's logo, the exceedingly comely receptionist, Camille, hastily concealed her gossip magazine as Ambrose stepped into view. Her headset glimmered under the overhead lights, a professional accessory at odds with the tabloid she tried to hide. "Good morning, Mr. Ambrose," she greeted, her voice smooth yet tinged with the nervousness of being caught. Ambrose approached her, his smile exuding charm that filled the air between them. "Good morning, Camille. So, what's the latest on Britney Spears? Is she still under conservatorship?" A giggle escaped Camille, her attempt at professionalism momentarily slipping. "It was terminated last year," she replied, her eyes darting back to her desk as if to regain control of the conversation. "Any messages?" Ambrose's question was casual, but his eyes searched her face for something more. Camille shook her head, offering a firm no. A flicker of surprise, nearly indiscernible, broke across Ambrose's otherwise composed face. "You're sure? I was expecting a call from Mrs. Blackwell this morning." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ambrose, but there hasn't been any calls," Camille confirmed, her apology laced with confusion over his reaction. Nodding, Ambrose reached across the desk to collect his mail. Without another word, he moved towards the office door, entering the darkened space inside. The door closed quickly behind him, enveloping him in the quiet, secretive embrace of his office. Chapter 12: The Widow's Veil. Ambrose flipped the switch, flooding the barren expanse of the Cypress Group's office space with harsh light. Naked bulbs dangled from the rafters, casting eerie shadows across walls lined with exposed fiberglass insulation. The space was a maze of incomplete, rough frames, their skeletal structures stretching out like the bones of some forgotten beast. There was no sign of current construction, or any hint that there ever had been. With a dismissive gesture, Ambrose tossed his mail into an overflowing receptacle and made his way across the gutted space, his footsteps echoing ominously. He approached a glassed-off office, the sole oasis of habitability amidst the desolation. Inside his corner office, Ambrose moved directly to a filing cabinet. He rifled through the hanging folders labeled with names like Mr. Redding and Mr. Blanchard until his fingers found the tab marked Mrs. Blackwell. Extracting a sealed plastic bag containing a cell phone, he dialed the only number programmed into the device. As the phone rang, Ambrose's anticipation built, only to be met with the impersonal tone of an automated voicemail greeting. His face hardened, a shadow of frustration crossing his features. The repair shop at Humboldt Air Force Base was a chaotic jumble of parts and tools, the air thick with the scent of solder and machine oil. Gil, a man in his late 30s sporting a vibrant floral print shirt, was meticulously soldering spliced wires to a circuit board. The sudden awareness of another's presence made him turn, his gaze landing on Roger standing in the doorway. Roger's face was a patchwork of bruises and bandaged cuts, evidence of his recent struggles in bars and bar fights as he grappled with his grief. Gil straightened up, his eyes softening with empathy as he took in Roger's battered appearance. He fumbled for words, the weight of the situation clearly affecting him. "Roger, I was really sorry to hear about your wife. I still am sorry to hear about your wife. So if you ever want to talk, or come by for some homemade chimichangas," Gil offered, his voice laced with a genuine desire to help. Roger cut him off, his tone firm but appreciative. "I appreciate that, Gil. But I need your help with something." Later, the atmosphere in the shop shifted as Gil connected a USB cable from Jocelyn's GPS module to his computer. The screen lit up with the entire transit history of Jocelyn's BMW, a digital map of her recent movements laid bare. "This brings me back to my first marriage," Gil remarked, trying to lighten the mood as he commiserated with Roger. Leaning closer to the screen, Roger scrutinized the list of destinations and their corresponding dates, his eyes scanning for any anomalies in Jocelyn's travel patterns. His focus sharpened on one particular route. "She drove all the way up to British Columbia," Roger murmured, his voice tinged with confusion and suspicion. "She said she was going to a conference in Denver that weekend." Misinterpreting Roger's concern, Gil suggested, "You know what you do, Roger? You go up there and follow this guy for a whole day. Then you wait for him in the parking lot." Again, Roger cut him off, a plan forming in his mind. "I'm going to need one more favor from you, Gil." Chapter 13: Unseen Eyes. In another nondescript, gray, and institutional, commercial building in an office park in Washington, D.C. Beneath the surface, 6 stories below ground, lies a hidden world, shrouded in secrecy and shadow. The air grows cooler and damper with each descending step, the weight of the earth pressing in, a silent reminder of the clandestine activities that unfold far from the prying eyes above. The conference suite of the Fusion Center, undisclosed to the public, serves as a crucial hub for interagency intelligence sharing. Around the table, various agency liaisons and senior analysts are seated, engaged in a critical discussion. Pamela Nesbitt, representing the State Department with her androgynous haircut, holds the floor. Temperature readings indicate that Umar al-Hawaidi no longer considers Yemen his port of call, Pamela states, her voice steady despite the weight of the information. Bo Witten, mid-30s and a rising star at the CIA, listens intently. His comparative youth in the room speaks volumes about his ability to impress those who matter, as well as his knack for torpedoing careers along the way. So Cleric al-Hawaidi has fled his homeland? Bo challenges, his eyes narrowing. A place that has offered him refuge and safe haven for over 8 years. And how did you glean this intelligence? Pamela, sensing the challenge in his tone, responds, as you know, Ambassador Moyer has a long pre-existing dialogue with Yemen's defense ministry. Deputy Minister Al-Wazir considers Alan to be a dear friend and confidant. Bo's lips curl into a slight smirk. I'm well aware of the relationship that exists between the ambassador and Deputy Minister Al-Wazir. My sources even tell me that amongst his inner circle, Al-Wazir has a nickname for Alan. La Ruhem. That means marbles. A children's game. Easy to play. Not exactly a term of endearment. Pamela regards Bo with thinly veiled contempt. You're suggesting Yemen's defense ministry has willingly concealed al-Hawaidi's whereabouts. Now, why would they do that, given Umar al-Hawaidi's hatred for us is matched only by his hatred for the Yemeni government? Bo leans forward, his voice low and confident. Because hunting terrorists is big business for Yemen. The aid and resources we provide to hunt down men like al-Hawaidi has become a vital revenue stream for them. Why would they ever want to send their cash cow to the abattoir? I mean, sure, they'll give us some low-level goat fucker to maintain a performance history. But that's just to ensure we don't strip them of their funding. The academic official leaned forward, his voice tense with urgency. You claim to have a lock on al-Hawaidi's location. Why haven't we authorized an airstrike? Bo responded with measured calm. We're unsure of the depth of that cave network. But our ground assets report al-Hawaidi is mobilizing. We'll wait until he's in transit. That's when we can strike effectively. Graydon Abbott, a venerable figure in the CIA with regal gray hair like sculpted granite, shared the same clearance level as Bo. As one of the few colleagues with seniority over the young careerist, Graydon challenged Bo's strategy. And if it turns out to be another family picnic, like last time? If he's on a bus with his 11 wives and 29 children? You've advanced quickly, Mr. Witten. What's your take on that scenario? After a moment of reflection, Bo replied, consider how Saddam Hussein would place munitions factories next to schools and playgrounds to deter us from bombing those sites. Evil men exploit the morality of their enemies. In Yemen today, the call for jihad resounds not just in the mountains but in urban centers. Al-Hawaidi is revered like a celebrity among these people. Young boys hang his posters on their walls as if he were Eminem. My belief is that destroying this one bus could prevent the need to target 100, maybe even 1,000 more. It's a harsh calculus, but it's ours to make. A heavy silence fell over the room. Bo observed the subtle nods of agreement among the others, all but Graydon, who remained impassive, his expression betraying no sway under Bo's persuasive argument. The academic official, his voice tinged with a newfound conviction born of the recent discussion, breaks the silence. That kind of collateral damage could prove detrimental to our public image, he states, a cautious glance sweeping the room. Bo smirks, a sharp edge to his tone as he responds, and when did we start thinking in those terms? His words elicit a scattering of stifled laughter from the assembly, the sound echoing off the sterile walls of the Fusion Center. Hours later, in the lower corridors of the same facility, Bo strides with a purposeful gait, his footsteps echoing ominously. Graydon, quickening his pace, catches up to him, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Really took Pamela to task in there," he remarks, his voice low but carrying a hint of respect. Bo's response is immediate, his disdain for the situation palpable. Appointing someone as chromosomally deprived as Alan Moyer to the Yemen desk is an act of political seppuku. "I'm simply Pamela's Kaishakunen." He glances at Graydon, noting his confused look, and continues, "It was the Kaishakunen's duty to spare the one committing seppuku from any prolonged suffering by beheading him. It was considered a merciful act." As they turn down a bisecting hallway, the light shifts subtly, leading them into Bo's office. The space is impersonal and sparsely appointed, the only exception being a large window that frames a city skyline, a high-resolution image meant to mitigate the office's subterranean isolation. Bo takes a seat behind his desk, the skyline at his back casting him in a silhouette that seems to blend authority with the artificiality of his surroundings. Graydon lingers in the doorway, his posture tense. "Still, you didn't have to take such obvious joy in discrediting her," he chides, his voice laced with disapproval. Bo, already sifting through paperwork, dismisses Graydon's comment with a wave of his hand. "The chivalry act is growing stale, Graydon. So why don't you tell me what else is on your mind?" His gaze sharpens, sensing an underlying motive. Graydon's response is a hateful smirk, his voice dripping with accusation. "You've been appropriating some of your operational budget into off-site accounts. Yet you don't have any active ops running at present. At least none with any director-level approval." This stops Bo, effectively cornering Graydon with a metaphorical check on the board. "You've been monitoring my accounts." Bo's voice was steady, yet beneath it simmered a rising tension. Graydon leaned back, his expression nonchalant yet betraying a flicker of unease. "This agency is a band full of solo artists. Everyone's trying to break out with their own act." Bo's eyes narrowed, his tone sharpened with an edge. "Is this a formal inquiry, Graydon? If so, please let me know now so I can call the deputy director in. Then you can raise whatever broad suspicions you have while I discuss in particular terms the numerous kickbacks you've received over the years, tipping off your Rolodex of private government contractors to certain sources sought notices." The words hit Graydon like a physical blow, his face contorting as if he'd been sucker punched. Bo's strategic move had shifted to a decisive checkmate. Just then, a young aide entered the room, squeezing past Graydon with a purpose-driven urgency. "Mr. Whitten, I have a package for you," the young aide announced, holding out an envelope. In a perfunctory parting shot, Graydon offered, "Give Connie and your boy my best." With that, he exited, leaving a palpable tension in his wake. Bo turned his attention to the young aide, his gaze fixing on the envelope. "It has postage," he observed, a hint of curiosity threading his voice. "It's not from the overnight pouch. It was sent to the front office," the young aide explained. With a reluctant nod, Bo accepted the envelope, dismissing the young aide. Alone once more, he tore open the envelope and discovered a hotel room keycard inside, its presence sparking a swirl of questions and suspicions. Chapter 14, The Soldier's Code. Roger pulled his rental car, a common make and model, into the gas station lot under the cover of night. He stepped out, leaving behind a passenger seat strewn with fast food wrappers. He approached the gas station's convenience store, pausing only to address the attendant. "Give it a full tank," Roger instructed, his voice steady. He then made his way to a payphone, the cold receiver heavy in his hand as he fed it quarters. The line rang, and his heart clenched at the sound of his wife's voice on the other end. "Hi, you've reached Dr. Jocelyn Eberly. Please leave your name, number, and a brief message after the beep, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible, unless you're my husband," Jocelyn's recorded voice chimed with a playful note before the beep sounded. Roger swallowed hard, the silence stretching as he gathered his thoughts. "Jose, I know I'm speaking into an empty line. I wish I could think otherwise, but..." His words trailed off, a bitter edge creeping into his tone as he continued. I was convinced our marriage was terminal, Jose. I'd wake up every morning waiting for you to put me on notice. And towards the end, I despised you for keeping me waiting for a sentence." He paused, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. "One night I went to this bar, and before I went in I slid my ring off and stuck it in the glove box. This waitress, she saw the tan line, said I was a real amateur. That didn't stop her from getting in the car, though. But I couldn't go through with it, leaving her at her door like that. I mean, she must have thought I was out of practice or something." A rueful chuckle escaped him, but his voice soon hardened with resolve. "I want you to know, I don't care how deep or dark this thing goes, I'm going to set it right." With that, Roger hung up the receiver, lingering for a moment, as if half expecting the payphone to ring back with a message from the woman he had loved and lost. The door chime rang out, a jarring sound in the quiet gas station convenience store. The blasé clerk, engrossed in his crossword puzzle, barely glanced up at Roger before returning to his grid of letters. Roger navigated the narrow aisles, his steps silent on the linoleum floor, and reached into the refrigerated cooler for an oversized water bottle. The cold air brushed against his skin, a fleeting relief from the oppressive night heat. Suddenly, the throaty whine of a motorcycle engine cut through the stillness, causing Roger to freeze. He turned his head, peering through the grimy windows to see a sport bike at the fueling pump. A biker dismounted, his movements fluid and confident. As he removed his visored helmet, Roger's eyes narrowed. The biker was a complete unknown, yet something about his bearing, the way his gaze swept the surroundings, suggested his presence might not be coincidental. A creeping paranoia took hold of Roger. His heart rate quickened, and he moved to the register. The clerk set his puzzle book aside, his eyes meeting Roger's with disinterest. "Which pump?" the clerk asked, his voice as flat as the desert outside. Roger stole a glance outside, his eyes connecting with the biker's. The man's pitted eyes were riveted on Roger, a silent confirmation of suspicion. "Two," Roger replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. As the blasé clerk rang up the total, Roger's attention shifted to a display case of chintzy sunglasses. He reached for a pair of mirrored aviators, the cold metal frames a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. "You can ring those up too," Roger said, his gaze never leaving the biker outside. The clerk's brow furrowed, a slight crease of confusion marring his otherwise indifferent expression. "Been a while since I sold a pair of these," he remarked, his tone suggesting he found the transaction more curious than concerning. "I also need your bathroom key," Roger added, his mind already calculating his next move. The mirrored aviators were more than just a purchase, they were a tool, a shield, a way to obscure his eyes and intentions from the watchful stranger outside. Roger leaned over the sink in the dimly lit gas station bathroom, the cold water a sharp contrast against his haggard face. The door creaked open, slicing through the tension. Instinctively, Roger's eyes darted to the mirrored aviators perched atop the trash can, positioned to offer a discreet view of his flank. In the reflection of the lenses, he saw a biker enter, his heavy boots echoing on the tiled floor. The biker approached, seemingly oblivious to Roger's awareness. In a swift motion, Roger whirled around, his hand scooping a fistful of pink granulated soap from the dispenser. He flung it into the biker's face, the granules blinding him. Seizing the moment, Roger lunged forward, his fist jabbing the biker's throat with precision. The biker stumbled backward, crashing against the wall. Roger pinned him there, his forearm buried into the biker's neck, cutting off his air. Roger's hand swiftly found a snub-nosed revolver tucked into the biker's waistband. He pressed the cold metal to the biker's temple, his voice low and menacing. "Who's behind this? Who sent you?" Roger demanded. The biker gasped for air, his words choked. "Scanlon." "Scanlon?" Roger pressed further. "Jack Scanlon." "Freeway Jack, man," the biker managed to say, his expression turning to one of realization. "It's in my pocket, Felipe." Roger's hand rummaged inside the biker's jacket, pulling out a clear plastic bag filled with gray crystalline rocks. "What is this?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Priceless fucking rubies." "What do you think it is, ass clown?" the biker retorted, his bravado quickly fading. Shit, you're not fucking Felipe, are you? Without hesitation, Roger dropped the bag of meth onto the grimy floor and crushed it under his heel, the sound of crunching crystals filling the small space. The biker winced, watching his stash turn into a fine powder. Roger then eased the pressure on the biker's neck, allowing him to slump to the floor, his chest heaving as he sucked in air. Roger spun the cylinder of the revolver, letting the bullets clatter to the ground. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the gun into a nearby urinal, his eyes fixed on the biker with a steely glare. Roger glanced at his watch, then back at the biker, his voice low and menacing. "You count off 5 minutes before you step out that door," he instructed, nodding toward the bag of crushed meth on the table. "Otherwise, I'll spoon-feed you that entire bag." Without waiting for a response, Roger moved purposefully toward the exit. The biker, still processing the threat, called out after him, uncertainty lacing his tone. "So you ain't gonna arrest me, man?" Roger never broke stride, as he exited the dimly lit building, the door clicking shut behind him with finality. Outside, the night air at the gas station was cool against his skin. Roger crossed the lot, the gravel crunching under his boots, and approached his car. His gaze, however, was drawn to a parked Escalade beside it. The vehicle was heavily customized with chrome trim and tinted windows, signaling wealth and perhaps danger. A man, his skin swarthy and adorned with a large platinum pectoral cross that could have served as an altar, paced impatiently near the Escalade. As Roger's eyes met his, the man snapped, "Fuck you looking at?" Roger remained calm, his voice even as he responded, "Nothing in particular." "Felipe." The man, known as Felipe, blanched, the color draining from his face. The mention of his name from a stranger suggested to him that Roger might be a cop. Fear propelled him into action. He hopped into his Escalade, the tires sending up plumes of dust as he peeled out of the gas station with reckless speed. Roger watched the vehicle disappear into the night, a thin smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He then climbed back into his rental car and pulled onto the road, heading north. The encounter had been brief, but it had served its purpose, unsettling yet another player in the dangerous game he was playing. Chapter 15: Threads of Fate. Located in the bustling downtown district of Washington, D.C., the hotel was a hive of activity with visiting dignitaries and power brokers milling about. A Lincoln Town car pulled up to the front entrance, its tires crunching softly on the pavement. From the driver's seat, Horace, a chauffeur with a distinctive crooked nose, stepped out and opened the back door with practiced ease. "I'll be right across the street, Mr. Whitten," Horace said, his voice carrying a hint of deference. Bo Whitten, emerging from the car, gave a quick nod. "I shouldn't be long, Horace," he replied before hurrying inside the hotel, his steps brisk and purposeful. Bo strode purposefully across the hotel lobby, bypassing the front desk with barely a glance. He exchanged quick handshakes and brief, insincere pleasantries with a couple of familiar faces before stepping into the elevator. The keycard reader beeped as Bo entered his hotel room, quickly shutting the door behind him. He surveyed the empty space before heading towards the balcony's sliding glass door. Outside, Bo approached the balcony railing, absorbing the expansive city view below. "Nice, isn't it?" a voice called from the side. Turning, Bo spotted Ambrose on the adjacent balcony, cigarette in hand, flicking ash into a tray balanced precariously on the railing. "They say people who live or work in a city will go years without looking up at the buildings. It's called the tourist plane. I find myself crossing it every now and then, trying to see this place the way I first saw it years ago," Ambrose mused, his voice trailing off for a moment. "There's been a complication." "I'd say that's putting it rather euphemistically," Bo replied dryly. "Yeah, I thought you might already know. So, do we have a containment protocol in place?" "Containment protocol? The local constabulary have already pulled your operatives from the wreckage. This isn't a little spill on the hardwood floor. This is a carpet stain. Right now, they're running the dental records on that bucket of extra crispy. But I had one of my programmers slip falsified criminal backgrounds into the system. Those cuspids now belong to a couple of vagrant crackheads with a litany of priors. Should be enough for them to write it off as a botched car theft. What about when they trace the car back to our principal? Mr. Eberly reported the car stolen," It gives us a consistent narrative." With an amused grin spreading across his face, Ambrose remarked, "He reported it stolen. Guess he wants to handle this personally." Bo leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "And now, I want you handling this personally." Ambrose's eyes narrowed slightly, his response measured and firm. "I hung up my work gloves, Mr. Witten. I'm a foreman now. I give estimates, put together crews, order materials. That's the extent of my involvement." Clearly not the answer Bo was looking for. He leaned back, his gaze sharpening as he recounted an old tale. "You know, back in the feudal days of Japan, to become a bladesmith was considered a most honorable path for a man, second only to being a samurai. Manipulating the tomahawk, the Japanese steel, into an elemental composition that held a sharp edge while remaining impact-resistant was a nuanced art. And if a bladesmith's sword broke in combat, it was expected that the next sword he forged would be the one he'd use to open his stomach." Though the threatening subtext wasn't lost on Ambrose, he remained composed, his expression betraying no fear. "I might not have attended the same bullshit Ivy League feeder school as you, Mr. Witten, but that almost sounded like a threat." He chuckled to himself. "Threatened by an analyst? Can't say I've ever had the pleasure." Ambrose turned, moving closer to Bo, his urbane charm subtly transforming into an understated menace. "Tell me then, Mr. Witten, in your analysis, do you think it's wise to threaten me? Given our close proximity?" Reaching for his cigarette, Ambrose stubbed it out in the ashtray. A resounding ping echoed, and the ashtray shattered in a spray of sparks, littering the balcony with fragments of plaster. As Ambrose exhaled a cloud of smoke, the red beam of a laser sight briefly pierced through the cigarette vapor. With a self-satisfied grin, Bo nodded across the street, acknowledging the unseen sniper's precision. Horace lay prone on the rooftop of the parking structure, his body comfortably settled on a piece of flattened cardboard. Through the telescopic sight of his bipod-stabilized sniper rifle, he focused intently on the distant hotel. With practiced ease, he ejected the spent casing and chambered a fresh cartridge. A parabolic microphone, carefully directed towards the hotel, allowed Horace to eavesdrop on the conversation unfolding between Bo and Ambrose. On the balcony of the hotel, Bo reached into his suit pocket with a deliberate motion. His voice carried a hint of skepticism as he spoke. "I worry, Mr. Ambrose, that I may be overestimating you." As he spoke, he pulled out an envelope, its shape hinting at a banded brick of money nestled inside. With a smooth gesture, he handed the envelope to Ambrose, adding, "For your incidentals. And do keep me apprised." Bo then retreated back into the hotel room, leaving Ambrose alone on the balcony. Ambrose's body tensed, his eyes glinting with a murderous intensity as he watched Bo disappear. A thin wisp of smoke curling up from his cigarette caught his attention. The cigarette had burned all the way down to the filter, the heat blistering his fingers as it extinguished itself against his skin. Yet Ambrose showed no reaction to the pain, merely flexing his fingers and crushing the remnants of the cigarette under his heel. Chapter 16: The Hidden Cache. The supply store stood like a pioneer outpost, displaced from another time, nestled in a clearing surrounded by a thick, expansive forest blanketed in densely packed snow. The crunch of snow under tires announced Roger's arrival as he pulled up in his rental car. Inside the car, the heat blasted against the chill outside. Roger's eyes flicked to his wife's GPS module, its female mechanized voice repeating like a mantra, "You have arrived at your destination." He looked up through the frosty windshield at the rustic building ahead. Stepping out into the biting cold, Roger's boots crunched on the snow. He trudged toward the supply store, his hot breath clouding in the frigid air as he cupped his hands over his mouth. With determined strides, he bounded up the steps to the porch where a woodsman was at work. The woodsman, engrossed in his task, didn't immediately acknowledge Roger's approach. He was using a Bowie knife to make long, interconnected incisions in a strung-up deer carcass, the precision and ease of his movements betraying a lifetime of wilderness survival. Roger paused at the sight, taking in the scene before him. As Roger stepped onto the porch, the woodsman turned his gaze toward him. Most of the woodsman's face was obscured by a feral overgrowth of hair and beard that would make even the wildest Vikings seem well-groomed by comparison. A patch of frostbite-blackened dead tissue marred the skin below his left eye, a testament to the harshness of the environment he called home. At Woodsman's feet lay a bucket filled with the deer's entrails, the raw scent of blood and viscera heavy in the air. Roger approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the forest floor. "I had a couple of questions," Roger said, his voice steady despite the unsettling scene before him. Woodsman regarded Roger with an unnerving, wild-eyed intensity, his face a mask of focus and feral energy. "Should have left your car running," he grunted, his words laced with a threat that hung in the chill air. Without waiting for a response, Woodsman returned to his task. His hands, stained with blood, moved methodically as he cut through cartilage, the sound a sharp slicing against the quiet. He pulled off the pelt with a practiced ease, revealing the pale flesh beneath, which he began to aerate, his movements precise and unhurried. Taking the hint, Roger stepped inside the rustic cabin, the door closing softly behind him, leaving the grisly tableau of the woodsman and his work to the shadows of the encroaching dusk. Roger stomped his boots as he entered the supply store nestled in the British Columbia wilderness. The scant denizens within turned their heads, their gazes lingering on the curious stranger. Their faces were uniformly incarnadine, marked by the drinker's blushes and climate-ruptured capillaries. He approached the proprietor, a man in his late 60s with a bulbous nose that resembled an overripe tomato. "Looking for directions?" the proprietor asked with a smirk. "Because I'm pretty certain you missed your exit." "No, I was wondering if you could help me," Roger replied, reaching into his wallet to retrieve a photo of his wife lying in a hammock. He held it up for the proprietor to see. "I wanted to know if you remember seeing this woman come in here in the past few months." The proprietor leaned forward, scrutinizing the image. "Whitest goddamn sand I've ever seen. Like powdered milk." "Where is that?" "Barbados." "Aruba," Roger corrected. "Ah, so that is your wife then." The proprietor's tone was probing, but Roger offered nothing, the past tense too painful to clarify. "Yeah, I figured as much," the proprietor continued. "Well, I've never seen her." "You're sure?" Roger pressed, his voice laced with dubiousness. "Why don't you look again?" With a sweeping gesture, the proprietor indicated the room. "Look at the faces I have to stare at every day. You think I'd really forget your wife's?" "Who else works here?" Roger inquired, his suspicion growing. "I'm the sole proprietor. I run a small business with limited overhead," the man replied curtly. Roger pocketed the photo, his eyes scanning the patronage with suspicion still etched on his face. The proprietor's voice broke the silence, his words aimed to dissuade. "I really don't think you're going to find what you're looking for here, mister." Roger turned back to face the proprietor, who continued. "If your wife was sneaking off for some kind of marital indiscretion, I think they could find someplace slightly more enchanting. I mean, it's not like I'm running a resort here. I think you got your wires crossed." After some quiet deliberation, Roger reluctantly exited the store, the weight of his search pressing down on him as he stepped back into the wilderness. Chapter 17, Whispers of Betrayal. Gil watched as Plato circled and sniffed the shrubbery at the base of a mailbox, his impatience growing with each passing second. "Come on, you got stage fright or something?" Gil muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the quiet neighborhood street. "Excuse me, sir?" a voice called out, pulling Gil's attention away from Plato. He turned to find Ambrose seated in a sleek Mercedes convertible, pulled off to the side of the road. Ambrose played the part of a flustered, lost driver perfectly. "I'm looking for Tallgrass, the country club." "I know it's close," Ambrose said, a hint of urgency in his voice. Gil approached Ambrose, awkwardly tugging Plato along behind him. "You don't have GPS in there?" he asked, nodding towards the dashboard. Ambrose chuckled, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "Spilled my espresso on it. It's pretty sad how much we depend on these things nowadays. I couldn't find my own mailbox without turn-by-turn directions from that GPS woman's modulated voice." "Yeah, I suppose that's the world we live in today," Gil replied, his gaze drifting back to Plato. "Anyway, you're on Greenway right now. Take this down to Lenox, make a left." Gil's instructions were cut short, as Plato erupted into a fit of barking, his attention fixed on a larger dog being walked across the street. Ambrose glanced down, feigning surprise at the sight of the small terrier. The little scrapper likes to fight outside his weight class. Scottish Terrier, right? Ambrose asked, his tone casual but probing. Struggling to quiet Plato, Gil responded, probably. I'm not really sure. He's not actually my dog. I'm just looking after him for a friend while he's away. They don't allow pets where he was vacationing? Ambrose inquired, his voice laced with innocent curiosity. Gil hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I wouldn't say it's a vacation. It's more of a family affair. Up in British Columbia. He paused, then continued. Anyway, left on Lennox, second light right on Vineyard. Take it down a ways, it should be on your left. Got that? Ambrose's lips curled into a knowing smile. Think I know where I'm going now, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice as he shifted the Mercedes into gear. In the depths of night, the motel's neon sign flickered, promising free premium cable to the weary travelers on the edge of British Columbia's snow-capped wilderness. The motel itself was unassuming, its accommodations stark and functional, offering little more than a place to rest one's head. Inside one of these modest rooms enveloped in darkness, Roger lay face down on the bed, cocooned in a tangle of blankets. His slumber was deep, undisturbed until, without warning, he jolted upright. In one fluid motion, he drew the handgun that had been tucked under his pillow, pointing it into the shadowy corners of the room. A voice emerged from the darkness, calm and unruffled. Thought I was going to have to clear my throat. A lamp clicked on, casting a soft glow over the scene and revealing Woodsman seated in a chair. His eyes now bore a sharpness and intelligence that had been carefully masked during his first encounter with Roger. I know why you're up here, Woodsman stated, his gaze unwavering. Roger kept his gun trained on the man, his voice tense. Enlighten me. You came up here to talk to me. Roger scoffed, his voice laced with skepticism. That's funny, given I don't know who you are, besides some guy who looks like he's been drinking his own piss for a little while now. So why would I want to talk to you? Because your wife came to see me. A month before she was killed. The word killed struck Roger like a hammer. His heart thumped loudly in his chest, the air around him suddenly thick with the weight of those words. You said killed. Roger's voice was barely a whisper, his mind racing with questions that threatened to spill out. Sensing the deluge of inquiries about to come, Woodsman quickly shifted the conversation. We can talk, but not here. That car outside, is it a rental? Yes, Roger replied, his focus momentarily diverted. Paid with cash? Yes. When was the last time you used your credit card? A kiosk outside the departures terminal at Denver International, Roger answered, his eyes still locked on Woodsman, searching for any sign of deceit. Woodsman nodded, seemingly satisfied with the responses. We'll take my truck. We can have that talk at my cabin. Roger's grip on the gun tightened, his voice cold. And I'm supposed to trust you. Norman Tish, the woodsman spoke with a calm yet firm tone, it's not like I've asked you to lower your gun. He then slowly rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and unhurried. My name's Norman Tish, he added, his eyes steady and unblinking as he faced the tension in the room. Chapter 18, The Alley's Price. The bar at the international airport buzzed with the restless energy of travelers, attempting to numb the frustration of flight delays with watered-down drinks and uninspired bar food. In a secluded booth, Vickery sat, his posture rigid, a testament to a soldier never fully at ease with civilian life. His freshly buzzed flat top and roving eyes betrayed a maladjustment, a constant scanning for threats that no longer existed in this world of suitcases and boarding announcements. Across from him, Arroyo lounged with a deceptive ease, his heavily inked arms a canvas of gang insignia intertwined with the remnants of his Marine war paint. A jagged scar marred the skin under his left eye, a deliberate erasure of the teardrops that once marked his previous life, a life he had forcefully distanced himself from. Arroyo leaned back, eyeing Vickery with a smirk that hinted at both amusement and challenge. Think this fucking guy will pay for our return tickets too? He asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Vickery met his gaze, unfazed. I'm more interested in hearing what else he has to offer, he replied, his tone suggesting deeper motives. Arroyo's eyes narrowed as he quickly sized up the man before him. I knew guys like you, he said, a hint of disdain creeping into his voice. You'd re-enlist if you could. Keep going back until you caught that non-survivable wound. Vickery chuckled, his smirk mirroring Arroyo's earlier expression. I knew guys like you too. The only reason you were over there in the first place was to avoid a prison sentence. The air between them thickened with a shared understanding, their pasts intersecting in a moment of mutual recognition. Arroyo's smirk evolved into a fiendish touche, acknowledging the hit with a nod of respect. Ambrose's voice cut through the air sharp and clear as he remarked, I see you two are getting acquainted. Arroyo and Vickery, startled, turned to find Ambrose standing crisply suited at their table. With an authoritative gesture, he signaled for Arroyo to sit up straight. Ambrose then slid smoothly into the seat next to him, placing 2 dossiers on the table. I'm glad you both accepted Captain Fowler's invitation to be here, he continued, his tone carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction. Arroyo's voice cut through the tension, his question aimed directly at Ambrose. You know Captain Fowler? Ambrose's lips curled into a slight smile, the kind that hinted at secrets shared in shadowed corners. We go back, he said, his tone casual yet carrying an undercurrent of significance. He earns a supplemental income now as my recruiting officer. Vickery, unable to contain his curiosity, interjected. Recruitment for what? His eyes flicked between Arroyo and Ambrose, seeking an answer in their expressions. Ambrose opened Vickery's file, his eyes scanning the pages with a clinical detachment. Owen James Vickery, Ambrose began, his tone flat but carrying an undercurrent of disdain. Scored average on your Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. In the Corps, that puts you in the gifted downslope of the bell curve. He paused, flipping through the document, each turn of the page a deliberate gesture. On the night of August 17th, you and some of your fellow ground pounders went outside the wire. Your mission? Collecting some Haji scalps. You boys managed to take down 9 non-combatants. Ambrose's eyes flicked up from the file to meet Vickery's, his gaze sharp and probing. You went about it smart too. No half-assed evidence plant or ambush conjecture. You used hand-me-down Kalashnikovs, the preferred hardware of the indigenous hostiles, to pin it on the Taliban. I bet that was your idea, Corporal. Nothing gets the old recreational apparatus rigid like a little escalation of force. Vickery's jaw tightened, a sour taste flooding his mouth as if it were filled with battery acid. Ambrose shifted his focus to Arroyo, opening his file with deliberate slowness. Edgar Villarreal Arroyo, Ambrose began, his voice carrying a note of calculated respect. You scored in the 98th percentile on your ASVAB. That's hot shit, Edgar. You must have been the theoretical physicist in your company. But you didn't really hit it off with your company commander, did you? His eyes flicked over the pages, absorbing the details. Says here he reprimanded you on several occasions for undermining his command. Goes on to say you accused him of being incompetent and quote-unquote, unfit to oversee a 4-man circle jerk. The mention of his superior brought Arroyo's blood to a boil. Dumb motherfucker led us right into a choke point. Twice, Arroyo growled, his voice thick with disdain. Ambrose's eyes glinted with interest, his tone casual yet probing. That's why you rigged up a roadside bomb emplacement to take out his vehicle during a convoy patrol. Arroyo's eyes narrowed on Ambrose, suspicion hardening his features. What is this? An investigation? Ambrose leaned back, a slight smile playing on his lips. An interview. And it's going well so far. Those trained to kill, who show little compunction in doing so, that's something you can't put a premium on. Especially in my trade. It's about time you both realized your earning potential. Ambrose reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek checkbook. With deliberate precision, he filled out 2 checks, his fountain pen gliding over the paper before he signed them with a flourish. 2 positions have opened up on my staff recently, he said, his voice smooth and composed. I was hoping to fill both of them today. He tore the checks along the perforated lines, sliding one across the table to Arroyo and another to Vickery. Their eyes widened as they glanced at the figures, the placement of the commas causing their jaws to drop. In an instant, they had leapt 2 tax brackets. "And that's just the starting salary," Ambrose added, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. With a fluid motion, Ambrose slid out of the booth and stood upright, adjusting his suit. "I've taken the liberty of packing gear for both of you. The rest we can discuss once we're airborne." Vickery, still pulling his eyes away from the staggering amount on his check, managed to ask, "When's our flight?" Ambrose responded with a dismissive tisk, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "This is the private sector now, boys. We don't fly commercial." Arroyo's grin was so wide and fixed that it seemed as if it couldn't be washed away, even with a beaker of hydrochloric acid. Chapter 19: Pawns and Players. Norman's resilient pickup, fitted with studded winter tires, navigated the winding forest road leading to the mountains. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the crunch of snow under the tires. Norman gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white against the icy road conditions. Roger sat beside him, his gaze fixed out the passenger window, his nose pressed against the seatbelt sash. He seemed to be inhaling the scent deeply, drawing it into his lungs as if it were a lifeline. Norman shot him a puzzled glance. "You taken a liking to my seatbelt?" he asked, his voice breaking the heavy quiet. Roger's reply was soft, almost lost in the hum of the engine. "Emerald Coast." Norman's brow furrowed in confusion. "What's that?" "Emerald Coast," Roger repeated, a wry chuckle escaping him. "My wife's perfume. I got it for her last Christmas. It was actually the wrong perfume. Some knockoff of Imperial Coast, the bottle Jocelyn actually wanted. But she never returned it. Wore it every day like it was the good stuff." His voice dropped, a shadow passing over his features. "Gave her a wicked rash, too." Norman's expression softened as he watched Roger, the man drawn to the ghostly trace of his dead wife's scent like a honeybee to a pheromone source. Roger's voice was barely a whisper now, filled with a haunting mix of longing and pain. "When you were driving her up here, did she seem afraid to you?" Norman took a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Your wife was up to her neck in something, and she was too smart not to know how events might play out for her. But I saw it in her face. There was no retreat in her." He paused, meeting Roger's intense gaze. "I see the same look in your face. You want to kill the ones who did it." Roger turned slowly, his eyes locking with Norman's, a steely resolve hardening his features. "I killed the ones who did it. Now, I want the ones responsible." The pickup rumbled to a stop in front of a remote log cabin, nestled deep within the rugged wilderness of British Columbia. The night air was crisp, biting at Roger's skin as he unfastened his seatbelt inside the vehicle. As he reached for the door handle, a sudden movement caught his eye. A wolfdog leapt at the window, its saliva leaving streaks on the glass as it barked furiously, hackles raised in a threatening stance. "Got a tactical bite suit I can borrow?" Roger asked, eyeing the agitated animal warily. Norman's response was practical. "Give me your scarf." Roger complied, handing over the fabric. Norman stepped out of the pickup, his boots crunching on the frosty ground. He let out a sharp whistle, and the wolfdog, responding immediately, bounded over to him. Norman bent down, wrapping Roger's scarf around the dog's snout, murmuring soothing words. The transformation was instant. The wolfdog's demeanor shifted from aggressive to calm. "Come on out," Norman called back to the vehicle, his voice carrying over the quiet of the night. Roger hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the pickup. He approached Norman and the now docile wolfdog with careful steps, each one deliberate and cautious. Norman stood up, a reassuring smile on his face. "I've made the proper introductions. He knows you're a friend now," Norman assured as the wolfdog approached Roger, its tail wagging tentatively. Roger stiffened, expecting a bite, but instead the wolfdog began to lick his hand gently. Relief washed over Roger as he reciprocated the gesture, patting the animal's scruff, feeling the coarse fur under his fingertips. "Let's get inside," Norman suggested, motioning towards the cabin. Roger started towards the front door, but Norman quickly corrected him. "Not the front door," he said, tilting his head slightly, "around back." Following Norman's lead, Roger veered away from the front entrance, his curiosity piqued about what awaited them inside the cabin. Norman guided Roger into the modest log cabin nestled deep in the British Columbia wilderness. With a flick of his wrist, he ignited a kerosene lamp, casting a warm glow over the rustic interior. The furniture, all wood-carved and handcrafted, exuded a charm not found in any store-bought catalog. Pelts of local wildlife were draped across one wall, adding to the cabin's raw, untamed ambience. As Roger's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed why they hadn't used the front entrance. A double-barreled shotgun was precariously positioned on a chair just inside the doorway, its trigger connected to a rope looped around the doorknob, a death trap ready to spring at the slightest intrusion. Roger's gaze lingered on the setup, his mind piecing together the harsh realities of life in such isolation. Norman, catching Roger's wary glance at the shotgun, offered a grim smile. "There's no mail or pizza delivery out here," he said, his voice carrying a note of wry humor. "If I hear a knock on my door, chances are it's not going to be a singing telegram." Roger, still processing the cabin's defenses, turned his attention back to Norman. Fatigue weighed heavily on him, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Who are these people?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and a hint of fear as he tried to understand the kind of world he had stumbled into. Norman offered Roger the use of the second bedroom upstairs, suggesting they continue their conversation in the morning. Roger, feeling the urgency of his quest, protested, "Listen, the only reason I agreed to come to your little letter bomb workshop up here was because you said you had answers. Now I need—" Norman cut him off, his voice firm yet laced with concern. "You need to sleep. You look like you're running on fumes. We can talk when you have a clear head." With that, Norman moved past Roger and ascended the steps to the second floor. Roger, recognizing the truth in Norman's words and feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him, knew he was on the verge of collapsing. Beleaguered, he followed Norman upstairs and retired to the second bedroom, the soft mattress promising a brief respite from his relentless pursuit. Inside the quiet, sleek cabin of the private jet, Vickery sat studying the materials inside a briefing packet. The dossier contained complete profile workups on Roger and Norman, along with hyperspectral satellite photos of Norman's remote cabin. The images were crisp, detailed enough to make their operation surgical. Arroyo, however, seemed less interested in the intelligence. His attention had fixed on Ambrose, who sat with earbuds plugged in, his hand drifting in gestural melody to what was presumably classical music. The elegant movements of his fingers betrayed a refined sensibility that made Arroyo uneasy. With sudden purpose, Arroyo straightened and took a seat directly opposite Ambrose, the movement intrusive enough to break the man from his musical reverie. Ambrose removed his earbuds, his expression mildly annoyed at the interruption. "You should be studying the materials you were given," Ambrose said, his tone carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Arroyo met his gaze without flinching. "I've studied it." "Well, how about a little exercise then, to test your retention level?" Ambrose leaned forward slightly, challenge in his eyes. "You kick open the front door and roll in a flashbang. Give me the floor plan. Map out the potential cover positions inside that cabin. In detail." The question hung in the air, a test Arroyo immediately recognized for what it was. His jaw tightened. "What are you looking for here?" Arroyo asked, an edge to his voice. "Do you want me to tell you about the partition wall that separates the kitchen from the main room? That it's 8 feet in diameter, 2 inches thick, and about 16 paces from the front entry point? Do you want me to tell you about the cupboard under the staircase with a 5-foot clearance? Or do you just want me to point out the fact that the front door opens out, not in, making this an inherently fallacious exercise?" Ambrose smirked as he leaned back in his chair, the word fallacious hanging in the air like a challenge. "As in a trick-fucking question," Arroyo retorted, giving the boy his due. Despite the tension, there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. Ambrose's expression softened slightly. So what's on your mind? Arroyo leaned forward, his gaze intense. You know everything about me and Captain America back there. But we don't know shit about you. With a casual shrug, Ambrose replied, So what do you want to know? My astrological sign. My idea of a perfect first date. Arroyo's eyes narrowed as he studied Ambrose. I'm being led into the field with some guy who's got manicured hands and a salon haircut. Ambrose chuckled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. And you want to know if I have the requisite street cred? If I'm on the level? Is that it? Without waiting for a response, Ambrose reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold lighter. With a deft flick of his wrist, he tossed it to Arroyo, who caught it reflexively. The weight of the lighter in his hand felt like a promise, a tangible piece of Ambrose's hidden story. Ambrose held out the lighter, his eyes intense with a mix of pride and challenge. Have a look at that, he said. Perplexed by its apparent significance, Arroyo took the lighter, examining it closely. What am I looking at? He asked, his brows furrowed in confusion. On the back. The inscription. It's in Arabic, but I read somewhere in your file you were enrolled in an Arabic language program because you didn't trust the local translators, Ambrose explained, his voice steady and assured. Arroyo turned the lighter over, struggling to translate the engraving. Carry the fire of Iraq with you. Always, he read aloud, his voice trailing off as he pieced together the meaning. Upon seeing the initials, Arroyo's eyes widened in disbelief, and he shot Ambrose an incredulous look. SH, he stated, the initials resonating with a heavy implication. That's right. It was a gift from Saddam. I took it off one of his couriers we intercepted. The same messenger pigeon that later gave us the Wolverine 1 and 2 sites, the actionable intel that led us to Saddam's spider hole, Ambrose revealed, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. So does that put your mind at ease? Or would you prefer a list of character references? Arroyo slid the lighter back to Ambrose, his expression softening slightly. We're good, he said, acknowledging the significance of the artifact and the trust it symbolized. Chapter 20, Steel and Shadows. Morning stillness enveloped the log cabin in British Columbia's wilderness, the scene as serene as an unshaken snow globe. Roger, fully dressed, stepped out of the back door and carefully traced the perimeter of the house. Just as he was about to take another step, a voice halted him in his tracks. Stop right there, Norman called out. Roger looked up to see Norman emerging from the tree line, a felled deer draped over his shoulders, his wolf dog shadowing his every move. Take 2 steps back, Norman instructed. Why? Roger asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. Norman dipped his head, gesturing downward. At your feet. Roger's gaze shifted to the ground where he found the denticulate, oxidized points of a foothold trap, protruding from the snow, like miniature stalagmites. He realized he had been less than a foot away from triggering the trap's pressure plate. The bears up here really get this close? Roger asked, stepping carefully as Norman passed by him. It's not for the bears, Norman replied cryptically. Roger followed Norman to his cabin, now more mindful of his steps, the silent threat of the wilderness underscoring every movement. Norman carefully positioned the kettle on the gas stove, the flame hissing as it began to boil water for tea. As the room filled with the comforting aroma of brewing herbs, he studied Roger, who sat across from him at the rough wooden table. Your wife told me what you do. And for a guy who sits in a windowless, air-conditioned room, you've got a lot of battle scars, Norman observed, his eyes scanning the visible marks on Roger's arms and face. Roger's hands, calloused from years at the joystick, traced the scars as he recounted his past. I was in the thick of it for 3 tours. During a night exfiltration, an insurgent took a carnival game pop at my Chinook with an RPG. When we crashed, I remember hearing the lucky son of a bitch hooting it up over winning his oversized bear. I was the only survivor. His voice held a mix of bitterness and distant pride, the memory etched deeply into his psyche. Norman nodded, respecting the weight of Roger's words. After a brief pause, Roger turned the conversation. What about you? My rank was lieutenant colonel. I was with the 1st Infantry Division, the Bloody First. But I didn't spend much time outside the wire. I was the resident psychiatrist on Forward Operating Base Rustamaya, or Rust, Norman explained, his tone tinged with the regret of a soldier who felt he hadn't done enough on the front lines. As he spoke, Norman finished preparing the tea. He poured the steaming liquid into 2 mugs, the steam curling up into the air. Sliding one across the table to Roger, he settled into his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. In front of him, a stack of folders lay, a reminder of the other battles he fought, those within the minds of soldiers like Roger. Norman recounted the harrowing incident with a steady voice, though his hands trembled slightly as he cooled his steaming coffee with a breath and took a sip. One night we lost contact with a recon convoy patrolling Route Cannonball, the main artery in our area of operations. A rescue team was dispatched and discovered that the convoy had been ambushed. An EFP, an explosively formed penetrator, had obliterated the lead Humvee. The men inside were described as being like potato head dolls, all their pieces rearranged grotesquely. The second Humvee was also destroyed, but eerily no bodies were found within it. He paused, his gaze drifting to the distance as if reliving the days of uncertainty that followed. For the next couple of days, we braced ourselves for the inevitable beheading videos of our guys to surface on YouTube. A week went by, then a month, and nearly 6 weeks had passed when a group of British private contractors arrived at the forward operating base. With them, to our astonishment, was our missing fire team. All 4 were alive, though bearing visible marks of superficial torture. Roger leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with a mix of relief and curiosity. What had happened to them? Norman recounted the harrowing details shared by the mercenaries. They had stumbled upon their men during a confrontation at an insurgent fortress where the captors were reportedly using barbaric methods, belt sanders and car batteries to wrench information from their captives. He paused, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. In light of their traumatic ordeal, the brass ordered all 4 men to my office. But when they arrived, none of them could recall what had happened. Their minds were completely blank. Roger, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation, snapped his fingers as he searched for the right words. Were they repressing it all? Like a defense mechanism, Norman finished the thought. That was the prevailing theory. But it wasn't just the torture they couldn't remember. It was everything. The entire incident was a blind spot, a lacuna. It was as if they had spent the last 6 weeks in cryogenic sleep. Despite Norman's pleas for more time to observe and understand the phenomenon, his superiors had him dismiss their memory loss as a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. Then, without further ado, they sent the men back to the States. Norman slid a folder across the table, positioning it in front of Roger. Inside, a photograph of Jeremy Whitcomb stared back, a man in his late 20s, his military uniform impeccably stiff and formal. 8 months later, one of those 4 boys, Jeremy Whitcomb, was found in his driveway, the victim of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, Norman explained, pausing briefly to let the gravity of his words sink in. Jeremy's wife hadn't described her husband's behavior leading up to his suicide as erratic. But 2 weeks before his death, Jeremy had told his wife he was going on a weekend fishing trip with some of the men from his former battalion. Only, the men Jeremy was supposed to be with that weekend knew nothing about any fishing trip. Norman extracted a newspaper clipping from the folder. The headline read, "Leader of hacker group Sigterm found dead in his home," with the subheading, "Possible drug overdose." This happened the same weekend Jeremy was unaccounted for, Norman remarked. Roger noted the article, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of suspicion. "Says that it was a drug overdose." Norman's gaze lingered on the clipping, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "And doesn't it say somewhere that your wife died of a stroke?" he asked, his tone probing yet cautious. This revelation caught Roger off guard. Norman leaned forward, his eyes intense with conviction. "Look, I can't prove that Jeremy Whitcomb had anything to do with the hacker's death. But I do know he rented a car that weekend, and that he returned it with close to 1,100 more miles on it." Roughly the mileage someone would rack up, traveling from Jeremy's home in Coffeyville, Kansas, to the hacker's home in Austin, Texas, and back again. It might be a strange correlation of dates, but it still seems like you're grasping at straws, Roger said, his voice tinged with skepticism. He searched Norman's eyes for a sign of doubt, but found none. Norman nodded slowly, acknowledging Roger's wariness. I thought so too. Until 5 months later, when Senator Devereux, along with 15 constituents attending the centennial for Arizona's oldest courthouse, were shot dead. Norman handed Roger another folder, the photo of Darrell Lee Unger clipped to the front. Darrell's image was striking, clean-cut in his dress blues, his eyes sharp and piercing. Norman continued, his voice steady, by Darrell Lee Unger. He was one of the 4 members of our battalion's missing fire team. The revelation hit Roger like a bucket of ice water, his mind reeling from the sudden connection to the past. The private jet rolled to a halt on the sun-baked tarmac of the private airfield, its air stairs unfolding with a mechanical whir. Ambrose, Arroyo, and Vickery descended the stairs swiftly, their boots echoing against the metal with urgency. Each man shouldered heavy packs laden with gear, their movements efficient and rehearsed. They made a beeline for a sleek SUV waiting nearby, its engine idling impatiently. With practiced ease, they loaded their equipment into the vehicle and climbed in, the SUV's tires screeching as it accelerated away from the airfield. Chapter 21, The Brain's Blueprint. Roger stood in the rustic kitchen of the log cabin, the walls closing in around him, as he processed the staggering revelation Norman had just dropped into his lap. He steadied himself against the rough-hewn counter, his fingers digging into the grooves of the wood. So what are you saying? Roger's voice was a mix of disbelief and urgency. These guys were brainwashed. Norman shook his head slowly, his eyes locked onto Roger's with a gravity that made the morning light streaming through the window feel colder. No, this was far more invasive than your conventional thought reform techniques, he explained. I'm talking about direct neural interfaces. Implanted brain prostheses. Roger's mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of the concept. You mean mind control? He asked, his voice rising a notch. By our own government? On its own people? He paused, searching Norman's face for any sign of jest or deceit. Do you realize how that sounds? Norman's expression remained unchanged, a silent affirmation that he was fully aware of the implications of his words. Norman recounted the events following the courthouse shooting, detailing his investigation into the British contractors who had retrieved their missing fire team. He discovered that their payments were processed through a CIA shell company. The supposed location where the insurgents were believed to have held their men captive turned out to be nothing more than a bombed-out, rancid-smelling waste incineration facility, exposed to the sky and visible to any satellite overhead. It was hardly a suitable hideout for American POWs. As Norman delved deeper into the circumstances of that day, the situation only grew more sinister. Somewhere along his investigative path, he must have triggered an alert. Norman then placed a folder in front of Roger, revealing a photograph of Byron Stuckey, another young soldier dressed in uniform. Byron Stuckey was the 3rd member of the fire team, Norman continued. And the man they sent to my home to kill me. Roger, shocked, could barely believe it. Didn't you serve with this guy? He asked incredulously. Norman's voice trembled as he spoke, the weight of his confession pressing heavily upon him. It wasn't personal or premeditated, he said, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Roger. It wasn't even a conscious act. He was just a machine on manual override. A mechanism. His voice shook with emotion, the memory of the incident still vivid and haunting. He reached for my throat, even as I caved his head in. After that, I stepped off the grid. With a deliberate motion, Norman pulled a clear plastic bag from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Roger reached for the bag, his fingers brushing the smooth surface as he held it up to the light. Inside, he found a small implant, its manifold circuitry intricate and unsettling. Norman's voice broke the heavy silence. I found that on Stuckey. Roger's brow furrowed in confusion and concern. On him? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He inspected the implant more closely, noticing that it was flecked with congealed blood, a grim testament to the violence that had led Norman to this moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fiery orange and deep purple, Ambrose maneuvered his snowmobile deftly through the rugged terrain of the British Columbia wilderness. Arroyo and Vickery followed closely behind, their faces obscured by neoprene balaclavas, bodies wrapped in insulated fatigues. The trio moved like a pack of wolves through the dense forest, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of blood, driving them forward with a predatory focus. Inside the main room of a rustic log cabin, the comforting aroma of simmering broth filled the air. Above the crackling fire in the fireplace, a cast-iron cauldron swung gently on a swivel crane, its contents bubbling enticingly. Norman, his cheeks flushed from the warmth of the fire, stirred the stew before ladling it into 2 wooden bowls. He then settled opposite Roger at the hearth, the flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. He handed one of the bowls to Roger, who accepted it with a nod, his eyes distant and his mind seemingly elsewhere, lost in thought. "What about the 4th man?" Roger's voice broke the silence, a note of urgency threading through his words. Norman reached for a nearby file and slid it across the rough-hewn wooden table toward Roger. Attached to the front was a photograph of Paul Meacham, another soldier with a pristine uniform and a stern expression, his eyes betraying nothing of the chaos that surrounded their mission. Norman leaned forward, his eyes intense yet weary. "He's living his life as far as he knows," he began, his voice steady. "He goes to work, pays his mortgage, and when he finds the time, helps his son with his batting swing. But the reality is, he's asleep. Until a hacker comes into possession of classified and sensitive in nature intelligence cables, or a senator on a covert actions subcommittee leaks said cables, at which point they'll wake him up." Roger's brow furrowed, his mind grappling with the implications. "And he won't remember what he's done?" he asked, the words heavy with dread. Norman nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Remember the Wolfman story? How he would wake up the morning after a kill with mud on his feet, blood on his hands, and no memory of what he'd done. The only difference is these guys have been programmed to clean up after themselves." As Norman spoke, Roger's gaze drifted to the flickering flames of the fireplace, their dance casting eerie shadows across his face. A haunted glimmer flickered in his eyes, reflecting the turmoil within as he processed the chilling reality Norman had just unveiled. Chapter 22, Circuit of Chaos. Roger felt the weight of the question that civilians often pose to veterans. "Did you kill anyone while you were over there?" More often than not, the answer was shrouded in uncertainty. "I don't know," he explained, his voice tinged with the weariness of a soldier. "You aimed at where the enemy was last seen, pulled the trigger, and if he vanished after the shot, perhaps you'd hit him or maybe he'd just moved. But when the shot was true, when you saw that unmistakable pink mist indicating a confirmed kill, the memory of such a moment seared into your consciousness. How could you forget something like that?" Norman, leaning against the rough-hewn wall of the cabin, interrupted Roger's reflections. "Maybe the neuroscientist behind that implant can answer that," he suggested, his tone speculative. "Your wife, she planned on seeking out someone. I remember her mentioning a company involved in brain implant research and development, working off some government." His words cut short, brutally interrupted as his head jerked unnaturally to the side. A bullet tore through his skull, creating a ghastly sluiceway. Blood erupted from the exit wound, vivid and relentless, reminiscent of runoff from a drainage culvert. Norman crumpled to the ground, his death as unceremonious and abrupt as the shot that claimed his life. Roger tracked the bullet's path, his gaze snapping to the window where he spotted a small hole in the glass between the half-drawn curtains. Reacting instinctively, he dove to the floor beneath the windows and swiftly pulled the curtains closed, his heart pounding in his chest. From a ridge high above, the barrel of an M40A5 rifle, equipped with a sound suppressor, protruded from a hole burrowed into a snowdrift, creating a makeshift gun embrasure. Ambrose, his breath vaporizing in the frigid air, maintained steady breaths as he peered through the telescopic sight. His eye swept over the distant cabin from his advantageous position. He communicated silently, using a bone mic to relay his observations. Ambrose spoke into his headset, his voice filtered and distant, confirming the status of their operations. Package 2 was wrapped up securely, Package 1 still in the fishbowl. At the front of the cabin, Arroyo, equipped with full tactical gear and night vision goggles, approached stealthily. His body tensed as he pressed himself against the wall next to the front door. He whispered into his bone mic, the communication device hugging his jawline, Milkman 1 in position. Meanwhile, at the rear of the cabin, Vickery mirrored Arroyo's readiness. Clad in similar tactical attire, he positioned himself for a breach at the back entrance. His voice, barely a whisper, crackled through his own bone mic, Milkman 2 in position. Ambrose, overseeing the operation, gave the final go-ahead with a simple command, his voice reaching them through their earpieces, "Ring the bell." Vickery acted decisively, his boot connecting with the back door in a forceful kick. He hurled a pair of flashbangs into the cabin, then swiftly retreated from the doorway. The grenades erupted moments later, filling the interior with a blinding magnesium flash and a concussive blast powerful enough to spiderweb the windows. Arroyo, undeterred by the chaos, yanked open the front door and stepped inside. Instantly, a spray of buckshot from a triggered shotgun caught him, lifting him off his feet and hurling him backward into the snow. Hearing the discharge, Vickery's voice crackled through the bone mic. "We have engagement," he announced curtly. He swiftly maneuvered through the back door, into the kitchen of the log cabin. The night enveloped the space, but the silence was shattered by the roar of his gun as he unleashed a storm of strafing gunfire. Bullets tore through the air, perforating the walls and furniture indiscriminately until his magazine was depleted, the spent casings clattering to the floor. Outside, in the rugged British Columbia wilderness, Arroyo lay twitching. The fragments of spread shot embedded in his Kevlar vest still smoldered, a testament to the close call. With agonizing effort, he righted himself and scurried to the front door, entering the main room of the cabin. The aftermath of Vickery's fusillade lay before him, walls riddled with holes, furniture reduced to splinters, the very structure of the cabin creaking ominously as if on the brink of collapse. Vickery emerged from the kitchen, the metallic sound of a fresh magazine slapping into his carbine breaking the tense atmosphere. From somewhere outside, Ambrose's voice, filtered and distant, queried, "Confirm, do you have the second package?" Arroyo's gaze swept over the detritus of shattered wood and broken glass. His eyes caught on a booby-trapped shotgun, ingeniously rigged for pressure release. He responded into his bone mic, his voice steady despite the chaos, "Negative. They had a shotgun blind rigged for pressure release." Arroyo and Vickery commenced their sweep of the ground floor, meticulously cataloging every detail. Arroyo's gaze falls on Norman's lifeless form, the dissipating embers in the fireplace, and the rising steam from the abandoned bowls of soup. Noticing the closed door of the staircase cupboard, Arroyo squeezes off a concentrated burst, stitching holes across the door. He approaches cautiously, reaches for the doorknob, and pulls it open to reveal only shredded coats and leaking canned preserves. Finding no sign of anyone on the ground floor, Arroyo nods to the second floor and begins climbing the stairs. Vickery trains his weapon on the second floor landing from below, covering Arroyo's ascent. Unbeknownst to him, dislodged grit trickles down onto the fireplace grate. Inside the chimney, Roger is wedged above, entombed in the claustrophobic confines of the bricked funnel. His outstretched limbs support him, veins rippling from the strain as he listens intently. On the second floor landing, Arroyo moves toward Norman's bedroom, with Vickery covering him from below. Arroyo extends a hand for the closed door, raises his weapon, and pulls it open. The attack comes lower than anticipated. The wolf dog lunges at the intruder with its unfamiliar scent. Arroyo tumbles to the floor with the wolf dog, struggling to keep its canines from his jugular. Vickery sees Arroyo wrestling with the wolf dog and aims his gun at the animal. Just then, inside the chimney, Roger hears the commotion. He releases his grip and falls to the bottom of the fireplace, losing hold of his gun, which drops beneath the grate. Exposed, and aware that his diversion will only last a few seconds, Roger abandons his hard-to-reach pistol and tumbles out of the fireplace. Vickery catches a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision and turns, only to find Roger charging at him like a speared bull. In a swift motion, Vickery spins his weapon toward Roger. The collision is inevitable. Roger slams into Vickery with the force of his momentum, sending them both crashing through a window. They land amidst a shower of glass, the snow outside cratered under the impact, swallowing Vickery's carbine into the knee-high powder. Struggling to their feet, the two men face each other squarely. With a deft flick, Vickery opens a tactical folding knife, its blade glinting ominously. A tense moment hangs in the frigid air as they size each other up. Then Vickery lunges, swiping at Roger's midsection. Roger ducks back just in time, the fabric of his shirt tearing across his waist. Quickly checking himself, Roger finds relief in the absence of blood. Vickery begins circling Roger like a seasoned boxer looking for an opening, readying himself for a second strike. As Vickery moves in again, Roger rushes him, seizing Vickery's wrist and halting the knife mid-swing. The struggle for control of the blade intensifies. Both men exchange devastating blows, their faces turning into raw hamburger patties in a brutal war of attrition. It becomes a grueling test of endurance. Who can stay conscious the longest? Roger, relenting first, attempts to maneuver behind Vickery, aiming to secure a chokehold. But Vickery counters with a sharp elbow and slips out of Roger's grasp. In a blind, desperate move, Vickery drives the knife backward, narrowly missing Roger's face and embedding it deeply into the bark of a nearby tree. As Vickery tries to free the blade, he realizes it's as firmly lodged as a sword in stone, impossible to remove without a hydraulic winch. Unarmed, both men step back, granting each other a momentary reprieve to catch their breath. Yet this pause is not a cessation of hostilities, it's merely an intermission in their relentless combat. Wind whipped the snow into a frenzy, revealing Vickery's fallen carbine half buried in the white expanse. The weapon lay equidistant between Roger and Vickery, its presence not lost on either man. A tense silence hung in the air, like the calm before the storm of a gun duel. Suddenly both lunged for the carbine, but Roger reached it first, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Vickery, a step behind, launched himself at Roger, wrapping his arms around Roger's neck in a tight headlock. Roger flailed, struggling to break free, his breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. His eyes, fixed on the carbine, widened as he noticed the rusted teeth of an ancient bear trap protruding from the snow just inches from the weapon. Using the struggle as a cover, Roger subtly kicked snow over the trap's teeth, completely concealing it. He then feigned resistance, allowing Vickery to shift him away from the gun. Seizing the opportunity, Vickery released Roger with a shove and dashed for the carbine. But his momentum was abruptly halted mid-stride. His face morphed into a mask of confusion as he looked down, only to see the bear trap's jaws clamped around his leg, the teeth buried deep in his thigh. In the night vision scope, Ambrose's eye zeroes in on Roger, the green glow highlighting his target's silhouette against the dark forest. His crosshair steadies on Roger's head, but just as he's about to squeeze the trigger, a shrill cry from Vickery over the bone microphone makes Ambrose flinch. The scope jerks upward, and the shot goes off prematurely. The bullet tears through Roger's shoulder, the impact spinning him around and slamming him against a tree. Pain explodes in his shoulder, but his survival instincts kick in. Eyes darting, Roger traces the bullet's path back to its origin, catching a distant muzzle flash in the darkness. Instinctively, he ducks as another bullet whizzes past, embedding itself into the tree with a violent crack, sending shards of bark flying. Clutching his wounded shoulder, Roger dashes into the forest, using the cabin as a shield between himself and the sniper. Each step is driven by the urgency to escape the deadly hail of bullets. Arroyo kicked the motionless wolf dog off him and extracted his knife from the dog's underside. He retrieved his fallen weapon from the floor and rushed downstairs. As Ambrose arrived on the scene, Arroyo burst through the front door. They synchronized their movements and followed the moans, discovering Vickery immobilized. A cataract of arterial blood ran down his leg, steaming the snow below into a roseate slush. "Get this fucking thing off me," Vickery pleaded desperately. Arroyo moved to help him, but Ambrose interjected, "Don't bother. You need a key to open those things." Arroyo noted the torrent pumping from Vickery's sliced femoral artery, as if it were a burst water pipe. "We got to do something for him," Arroyo urged, "before he has no more blood to lose. Maybe he should try chewing through his leg." Ambrose suggested with a cavalier attitude, drawing Vickery's ire. "Get me to a fucking doctor," Vickery grunted through gritted teeth. "I'll do you one better," Ambrose replied coldly. He raised his rifle and unceremoniously put a bullet in Vickery's frontal lobe. Shocked, Arroyo raised his weapon on Ambrose. "Fuck you do that for?" he demanded. Ambrose scoffed at Arroyo's outrage and bent down over Vickery's corpse, rummaging through his pockets. "It's not as simple as calling in a medevac," he explained. Finding what he was looking for on Vickery's person, Ambrose straightened up and approached the raised barrel of Arroyo's carbine. Ambrose held out Vickery's blood-stained check, his eyes locked on Arroyo. "We can't afford to handle little incidents like this indiscreetly," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of warning. "Wouldn't you agree?" Arroyo paused, weighing the offer. After a moment of due consideration, he lowered his weapon and snatched the check from Ambrose's outstretched hand. "You should have told me medical coverage wasn't included when I accepted the position," he grumbled, frustration evident in his tone. Suddenly, Ambrose stiffened, his ears pricking up at a distant sound. Arroyo, catching the shift in Ambrose's demeanor, stopped and listened. The faint noise reached him too, and without a word they both sprinted toward the forest, the urgency propelling them forward. Chapter 23: The Mirror's Truth. In the shadowy expanse of the British Columbia wilderness, the cold night air bit at Ambrose and Arroyo as they emerged into the staging area. Their eyes quickly caught the absence of one snowmobile, its spot now an empty void against the snow. Arroyo's gaze shot into the darkness, where the stolen vehicle's headlights sliced through the night like vengeful blades. Without hesitation, Arroyo leapt onto one of the remaining snowmobiles, his hand reaching for the start cord, ready to pursue the thief. Just as the engine was about to roar to life, Ambrose's strong grip yanked him off the seat, throwing him down into the snow with a thud. "What the fuck, man?" Arroyo protested, his breath visible in the cold air. "He's putting distance on us." Ignoring the outburst, Ambrose calmly directed the beam of his barrel-mounted flashlight toward the snowmobile Arroyo had been about to start. The light revealed a sabotaged ignition coil, crudely connected to the fuel tank, a dangerous setup designed to explode upon ignition. Arroyo's face drained of color, as he realized his impetuous action could have been his last. The stark realization of his near-fatal mistake deepened the tension between them. "We'll pick up his tracks again," Ambrose said coolly, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. Further down the trail, at the bus depot, a bustling transit hub just off a lonely stretch of interstate, Roger found himself in the solitude of the handicapped bathroom. He stood with his back to the mirror, his fingers trembling slightly as he peeled away his sticky, blood-soaked shirt. The fabric clung to his skin, revealing a gruesome exit wound, a caldera of both congealed and fresh blood. His gaze lingered on the injury, assessing the extent of the cavitation. The bullet had passed clean through, leaving a jagged hole in his flesh. With a wince, Roger swabbed the wound with gauze, the coarse fabric scraping against raw flesh. He gritted his teeth, the sting of rubbing alcohol searing through him as he disinfected the site. His hand reached for the sewing kit on the sink, the familiar tools a grim reminder of his new reality. Once the wound was sutured and dressed, Roger emerged into the main atrium of the bus depot. He took a seat amidst the other passengers, his face knotted with discomfort. The trail had gone cold, and he felt rudderless, defeated. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out an envelope, his fingers brushing against the contents within. He removed Jocelyn's wedding ring, handling it with the reverence one might reserve for a votive deposit from a lost culture. As he studied the ring, Roger noticed that the fire from the medical examiner's office had fused the band to the diamond. The damage was almost fitting, a physical manifestation of the tragedy that had befallen them. The ring, once a symbol of their enduring love, now bore the scars of their shattered life. Roger hurried across the atrium, his eyes locked on the phone booth. The accordion-style door squeaked as he closed it, the sound a sharp counterpoint to the pounding of his heart. He fumbled with the change, his fingers clumsy as he inserted it into the slot and dialed. The line rang once, twice, then clicked over to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Dr. Jocelyn Eberly. Please leave your name, number, and a brief message after the beep, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." Jocelyn's voice, light and playful, added, "Unless you're my husband." Roger's thumb pressed the pound key, then punched in the 4-digit code Jocelyn had set up, a ritual that grounded him, a reminder of the vows they had exchanged. The automated voice responded, "You have 2 new messages." First new message. The machine whirred as it queued up the recording. "Good afternoon. This is Alicia from Dr. Schneider's office. I'm calling to confirm that your first prenatal appointment is scheduled for Monday, the 17th. Please call back." The receiver slipped from Roger's grasp, clattering to the floor of the booth. The news struck him like a physical blow, a fresh mutation of his grief that left him reeling. Roger burst through a fire exit at the bus depot, his legs propelling him to the side of the building, where he collapsed beside a dumpster, retching violently. Sliding to the ground, he became a shell of a man, his body heaving but no tears or screams escaping him. His eyes, distant and unfocused, stared into the void ahead. Across the parking lot, a mother hurried past with her 7-year-old daughter in tow, gripping the child's hand tightly. The mother's hurried steps and wary glances pegged Roger as a vagrant, steering clear of him. Yet the young girl lagged behind, her innocent eyes brimming with an intrinsic kindness locking onto Roger. Her gaze reached into him, stirring memories of Jocelyn, the empathy in her look a poignant reminder of what he had lost. "Stop staring at him," the mother whispered sternly to her daughter, pulling her along. But the girl's eyes remained fixed on Roger, a silent connection that pierced through his crippling despair, rousing him from the depths of his grief. Chapter 24. Echoes of Murder. The Little League baseball field was a picture of perfection, with its manicured grass and impeccably groomed infield, a venue worthy of the heirs apparent of the Washington elite. As one team took to the field, Andrew, the 10-year-old pitcher, shouldered the weight of his responsibility as he approached the mound. The bottom of the 8th inning loomed before him, a 1-run lead hanging precariously in the balance against the meat of the lineup. "Come here, Andrew," Bo's voice cut through the chatter from the spectator's side. Andrew trotted over, his steps quick and eager, sensing the gravity of the moment as he approached his father. Bo leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "That Blaylock kid's up first," Bo murmured, his eyes fixed on the batter's box where the opposing player waited. "And he can tie this up with one swing. Don't let him squeeze that strike zone." Andrew nodded, understanding the implication. "You want me to brush him off?" Bo's lips curled into a tight smile, his instructions clear but veiled in plausible deniability. "I want you to wipe his chin. But don't put the tying run on base either. Make sure you miss him. Just miss him high. Understand?" "I do," Andrew replied, the weight of his father's expectations settling heavily on his young shoulders. With a curt nod, Bo dismissed him, the interaction feeling more like a business transaction than a father-son moment. As Andrew returned to the mound, the weight of being groomed as a successor rather than simply being raised as a son clung to him like a heavy cloak, a burden that seemed to grow heavier with each step he took. As Andrew trotted out to the mound, Bo made his way back to the bleachers where his wife Connie was seated. In her well-preserved 30s, she shot her husband a pointed look as he approached. Just as Bo began to climb the bleachers, a chirp from his pocket interrupted him. He dug out his cell phone and quickly scanned the incoming text. "I'm going to run to the concession stand," Bo said tersely to Connie before dashing off. At that exact moment, Andrew's fastball, intended as a warning, sent the Blaylock kid sprawling into the dirt of the batter's box. Cries of indignation erupted from the opposing team's bleachers. At the Little League concession stand behind the outfield wall, Ambrose cherries a cigarette and tosses his gold lighter to Arroyo. Arroyo lights up and motions to throw the lighter back. "No, you keep it," Ambrose says. "Consider it part of your compensation package." Arroyo shakes his head, reluctant. "No, man, I can't accept this. This should be like a family heirloom, a birthright or some shit to give to your kids." Ambrose smirks. "I have no interest in disseminating my seed, first of all. And secondly, I have 2 more of those at home." "2 more of these lighters?" Arroyo asks, flummoxed. When the Coalition Provisional Authority took up residence in Saddam's Republican palace, they found an entire crate of those in the basement. Buddy of mine in the green zone sent me a few. Ambrose shrugs at Arroyo's look. Hey, part of being coach is knowing how to motivate your team. As they speak, Bo approaches, his shadow Horus materializing from the side of the concession stand, eyes locked on Ambrose and Arroyo. Goddamn Horus, are you ever off the clock? Ambrose quips, though his tone is anything but light. I still remember when you used to shadow Forrest Loeb. You were like his mobile coat rack, until his forced retirement, that is. He nods back at Bo. You being with him, it's almost Shakespearean in a way. Adopted by the man who orphaned you. But I suppose a dog can serve many masters in his lifetime. Horus offers nothing in response, his silence perhaps concealing a simmering resentment as Ambrose picks at the scab of his past. Horus is a company man. Isn't that right, Horus? Bo interjects, moving past Arroyo and motioning for Ambrose to follow him to the side for a private audience, leaving Arroyo and Horus alone. Arroyo, eyeing Horus's right-favoring nose, quips, I'm a southpaw. So if you want, I can straighten that out for you. But Horus remains a silent, inscrutable sphinx. Bo and Ambrose walk, keeping their tone conversational but edged with urgency. Did you fulfill the contract? Bo asks. Ambrose stood, his posture relaxed yet focused as he addressed Bo. I took care of the secondary target, he stated, his tone carrying a hint of satisfaction. Bo, quickly impatient, shifted his weight, his impatience evident in his stance. But not the principal. So do you have any idea where he's gone to ground? I thought that given your access to certain company resources, we could expedite our search, Ambrose suggested, his eyes scanning Bo for any sign of agreement. Bo's response was firm, his arms crossed defensively. Out of the question. I can't have that name popping up in the registry. Ambrose raised an eyebrow, a slight challenge in his voice. You can't cover your tracks? Like before. The CIA surveillance index is like the surface of the moon, Bo retorted, his gaze steady and unyielding. Accessing it leaves a lasting footprint. And what are you so worried about? Are you under investigation? Ambrose pressed, his curiosity piqued. Scoffing at Ambrose's naivete, Bo leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. Everyone in the company is under investigation. Goddamn, janitor's got an open file. No, this needs to stay off campus. His expression darkened, his tone turning accusatory as he turned on Ambrose. And you need to start justifying your existence in this world. But Ambrose was too distracted to register Bo's threat. His attention shifted upward, and Bo followed his gaze, watching as a baseball sailed over the outfield fence, plopping at Bo's feet. Bo's eyes flicked to the field, observing the Blaylock kid rounding the bases triumphantly, much to the chagrin of Andrew. Ambrose, seizing the moment to lighten the tension, goaded Bo with a smirk. He hung that one up like a piñata. Yet, the sight of the game triggered a thought in Bo. His expression changed from annoyance to contemplation. I think I know where you can head him off, he mused, his mind already formulating a plan. Chapter 25, The Hunt Begins. Roger sat hunched over a computer in the internet cafe, surrounded by a sea of printouts detailing nearly 20 companies actively engaged in brain implant technology. The pad beside him was a testament to his hours of research, each company meticulously noted. The relentless pursuit had consumed his day. As he delved deeper into the internet, calling up articles from scholarly journals and news magazines, the information overwhelmed him, a relentless flood he couldn't escape. Time blurred into a monotonous cycle of discovery and frustration. Hours later, the coffee next to him had gone stale and cold, its steam long dissipated. The list on his pad had grown exponentially, yet not a single company had been crossed off. Roger was the last patron in the cafe, his body hunched forward, fingertips pressing into his temples as he squinted blearily at the monitor. The barista, a young woman with a gentle demeanor, approached him while cleaning up the surrounding tables. She stood close, her presence momentarily interrupting his focus. We're going to be closing up, sir, she said, her voice breaking through his trance. But Roger's eyes narrowed on the monitor, a flicker of something catching his attention, pulling him back into the digital abyss. Sir, we really are closing up now, the barista pressed, her tone firm yet polite. Without looking away from the screen, Roger reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. 10 minutes, he said, his voice a low, insistent murmur. The barista hesitated, then reluctantly pocketed the money and resumed her cleanup, leaving Roger to his urgent task. Roger's fingers fumble in his pocket, retrieving a plastic bag with the implant inside. He carefully extracts the device and holds it up against the computer monitor, comparing it with the implant displayed on the screen. His gaze shifts between the real and the digital, scrutinizing the caterpillar of circuitry on the screen, noting the arched curvature designed to conform to the brain's uneven contours and the elegant filigree of wiring. It's all identical to the one he holds in his hand. He shifts his attention to an article profiling the company behind the implant, Neuroconcepts. Excerpts catch his eye. Government contract awarded to Neuroconcepts. Advancements in brain-computer interface technology that allow amputee veterans the ability to manipulate upper and lower extremity prosthetic limbs via thought control. Neuroconcepts enters the test phase with innovative chip implant sensor technology. Roger's focus then zeroes in on the man pictured in the article's photo, Dr. Haskell Fuchs. In his late 50s, Fuchs' eyes betray a searing intelligence, and he is identified as the lead research scientist. Curious about the company's whereabouts, Roger looks up Neuroconcepts' base of operations and finds a Manhattan address. A blacked-out Lincoln pulled up in front of an office building in Midtown Manhattan. 2 bodyguards, broad-shouldered and anonymous, stepped out of the car. Bodyguard 1 kept watch, his head swiveling to monitor their surroundings, while Bodyguard 2 opened the rear passenger door for Dr. Haskell Fuchs. The imposing heavies escorted Fuchs through the office building's revolving door. Across the street, Roger, his eyes trained on Fuchs, crossed the road and followed them inside. Inside the lobby, flanked by his bodyguards, Fuchs strode toward a bank of 3 elevators at the back that serviced the uppermost floors. As Fuchs and his bodyguards disappeared inside an elevator, Roger watched them from across the expansive lobby, clocking their movements with a practiced eye. The elevator ascended to the research lab at Neuroconcepts, an antiseptic, glassed-in space filled with unoccupied lab stations. Fuchs was the only person working there, with Bodyguard 1 monitoring him from the lab's doors. Fuchs, taking notes, observed a rhesus monkey fitted in a harness, its arms restrained and a recording net of electrodes fastened to its head. The monkey reached for a black knob using a robotic arm controlled by thought, maneuvering it like an arcade crane claw until its gripper appendage found the knob. The monkey put its mouth to a nearby straw for a drink reward as the arm reset and the black knob repositioned. Fuchs oversaw the experiment, his demeanor lacking verve and interest. He seemed completely and utterly bored. As the monkey repeated the exercise, Fuchs charted data from the neuroimaging monitors, all the while humming to himself the tune of The Ants Go Marching. In the main corridor of Neuroconcepts, Bodyguard 2 stood, devouring a sandwich with his eyes fixed on the 3 elevators that serviced the top floor. His chewing halted abruptly as he noticed the floor numbers on the panel beside the right elevator ticking upward. A ripple of tension coursed through him. He wasn't expecting any visitors. Instinctively, his hand moved to his holstered gun. With a swift motion, Bodyguard 2 drew his weapon, flicking off the safety. The elevator chimed, a sharp ping, and the doors slid open, revealing a fire extinguisher spewing sodium bicarbonate like volcanic ash, the cloud obscuring whatever lay within. Cautiously, Bodyguard 2 advanced toward the right elevator, his finger poised on the trigger, ready to shoot at the first sign of movement. Another ping echoed through the corridor as the middle elevator opened, cloaked in a similar dense white mist from another pierced extinguisher. His head whipped around, his gun now swinging between the 2 elevators, though he favored the middle one. Before he could decide, a third ping resounded, and the left elevator doors parted, releasing a billow of flame-retardant vapor. Bodyguard 2 spun around to cover the third opening, when, suddenly, 2 arms shot out from the middle elevator. They seized him, dragging him into the murky depths of the flaky miasma where he vanished from sight. Chapter 26, Cage of Rage. Fuchs moved mechanically through the Neuroconcepts research lab, his every action observed by Bodyguard 1. The constant surveillance made him feel like a lab rat, intensifying his discomfort. In a surge of frustration, Fuchs tossed his notebook aside and began to undo the restraints on the monkey, his movements sharp and irritated. As he reached to remove the cap of electrodes, the monkey lunged, snapping at his hands. "You little shit," Fuchs hissed, his voice laced with venom. "After this, I'm shipping you to a lab where they test the eye irritancy levels of shampoo." His threat was cold, the words slicing through the sterile air of the lab. He then opened a drawer nearby, his fingers brushing against a small, cell phone-sized electroshock prod. The sound of a handgun being primed cut through the tension, a distinct click that made Fuchs freeze. Slowly, he turned to face Roger, who stood before him, his figure dusted with extinguisher spray. Fuchs' complexion drained of color, a flicker of recognition surfacing in his eyes as he confronted the man pointing a gun at him. Fuchs's voice trembled slightly as he asked, "Are you here to kill me?" Roger's eyes were cold, his voice steady as he replied, "We'll start with some questions and go from there." Without waiting for a response, Roger reached out, his fingers digging into Fuchs's shoulder. "Let's go to your office," he said, his tone brooking no argument. He dragged Fuchs away from the spot, unaware that the scientist had now concealed an electroshock prod in his possession. Dr. Fuchs' office offered a breathtaking panorama of Midtown Manhattan through its expansive windows, the city sprawling beneath them like a digital map waiting to be explored. Roger shoved the two bodyguards, now bound and gagged, to the floor where they landed in an unceremonious heap. Keeping his Beretta trained on Fuchs, he gestured for the scientist to move deeper into the office. Fuchs regarded the weapon with visible annoyance, his German accent becoming more pronounced with his agitation. "Is it absolutely necessary to keep the gun on me?" "Funny, coming from a man who travels with an armed security detail," Roger replied, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard, ready to move at the slightest provocation. Fuchs released a bitter snort, his eyes darting briefly to the incapacitated men on the floor. "Bodyguards? Is that what you think?" He shook his head, a flicker of resentment crossing his features. "Those men are my jailers. And this place is my prison. They don't even permit me to have research assistants." Roger's brow furrowed, momentarily confused by this unexpected perspective. "So what are you, some kind of a political prisoner?" "No, I'm government property." Fuchs' voice carried the weariness of a man who had long ago accepted his gilded cage. "These people believe they have exclusive, proprietary rights to the clockwork of my mind. Every gear and spring, from the algorithms I developed to decode a brain's neuronal firings, to my recipe for spinach artichoke dip, they're all intangible assets belonging to the CIA." With barely contained contempt, Roger tossed the bagged brain implant at Fuchs, watching as the scientist's eyes widened in recognition of the device. "But isn't that what they're really after? Behavioral modification?" Roger asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Fuchs corrected him with academic precision. "Behavioral manipulation." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "It began as translating cortical activity into programmable input that would permit the subject to embody a prosthetic device in real time. But then I thought if I could codify the brain signals into a programming language with a governing set of syntactic and semantic rules, I could interface with the subject's brain much like a computer operating system and execute commands." Roger's jaw clenched. The clinical detachment in Fuchs' voice made his blood boil, as if the man were discussing an interesting coding problem rather than the manipulation of human beings. "Like shooting up a courthouse full of innocent people?" he demanded, each word sharp as broken glass. "That was unintended," Fuchs replied, his tone still maddeningly academic. "A corruption written into the subject's kernel. Possibly some anti-pattern missed by the check routines." The cold, technical explanation pushed Roger past his breaking point. Without warning, he raised his weapon and fired. The desk lamp exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. Fuchs recoiled violently, pressing himself against the wall, his eyes widening with sudden, visceral fear as he stared at Roger, finally understanding that scientific explanations wouldn't save him from the consequences of what he'd created. Roger's grip on the Beretta tightened as he spoke, his voice raw with conviction. "It was a massacre. Not a fucking computer glitch. Fuchs remained unnervingly calm, studying Roger with clinical detachment. What about what you do, Mr. Eberly? How many villages in the Kandahar province have experienced declining census numbers due to unattributed explosions from drone strikes? The question hit Roger like a physical blow. His expression shifted from anger to confusion, the implications settling in his mind. You know who I am. Roger's eyes narrowed as the pieces clicked into place. A guy walks into your office, sticks a gun in your face, and you don't ask who he is and what he wants. Fuchs' lips curved into the barest smile. It's because I know what you want. When Fuchs moved toward his desk, Roger instantly raised the gun higher, finger tensing on the trigger. Not another step. Fuchs froze, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. It's on my computer. Roger considered this for a long moment. The only sound in the room, their measured breathing and the faint hum of machinery. The stakes were too high to make the wrong move. All right, he finally conceded. But just know, you can pull out a chain gun and you'll still die first. With slow, deliberate movements, Fuchs circled around to his desk while Roger shadowed him, the gun never wavering from its target. Fuchs sat down and began typing, calling up an encryption screen that demanded a password. Roger watched as Fuchs' fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting a code represented only by stars on the screen. The monitor flashed, then displayed the Disciple program. A vast index of files appeared, each bearing biblical names, Matthew, Luke, John, and dozens more. Roger's eyes scanned the list until Fuchs clicked on a file marked Simon. The screen populated with a familiar face, Daryl Lee Unger, alongside a comprehensive dossier detailing everything from physical measurements to psychological profiles. Fuchs clicked on an embedded video and turned to Roger, his expression unreadable. This is how it works. Chapter 27, Puppets Unstrung. The steady handheld footage displayed on the computer monitor revealed a disturbing scene. Daryl strapped to a metal chair bolted to the floor, his head wrapped in strips of medical gauze. The setting had an unsettling quality, subterranean and clandestine, designed for operations away from prying eyes. From behind the camera, Fuchs narrated clinically, Disciple Simon, 8 days post-implantation. As Daryl continued yelling and bucking against his restraints, the camera lowered to focus on a device covered with acoustically transparent fabric, featuring an alphanumeric keypad. A hand, Fuchs, reached into frame and punched a sequence of keys, activating the device. It began emitting a low, ominous hum. The device you see here emits what we refer to as an arming sequence, Fuchs explained, his voice detached and scientific. A high-frequency acoustic signature, indiscernible to the human ear. But all disciples are surgically fitted with cochlear transmitters to receive the sonic activation, which triggers the brain implant. The camera returned to Daryl, who had undergone a chilling transformation. His previous struggles had ceased completely. He sat eerily still, eyes vacant, his entire demeanor suggesting a trance-like state. As you can see, the Disciple's been activated, Fuchs continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. Daryl spoke, his voice now carrying a disturbing robotic modulation. Designate access permissions. Addressing the transformed man directly, Fuchs responded, Sierra Whiskey Victor 7669er. Authenticate. After a brief pause, Daryl replied mechanically, Administrative privileges granted. Welcome, host user. Fuchs entered the frame and methodically unfastened Daryl's restraints, confident in his control. At attention, Private, he commanded. Like a marionette responding to its puppeteer, Daryl straightened immediately, his movements precise yet unnaturally fluid. Private, would you please approach the table saw, Fuchs continued, his clinical tone betraying no hint of the horror about to unfold. The video tracked Daryl as he moved toward the industrial table saw. His movements were mechanical, his eyes vacant, a man sleepwalking through a nightmare he couldn't comprehend. There was something profoundly disturbing about his gait, the slight delay between command and action that suggested his body wasn't entirely his own. Switch on the table saw, Private. Without hesitation or concern, Daryl reached beneath the saw's metal surface and flicked the power switch. The circular blade roared to life, spinning into a silver blur that hummed with lethal intent. The sound alone should have triggered some primal fear response, but Daryl's expression remained blank. "Now, Private, I want you to put your face as close to the blade as possible without touching." Roger's stomach clenched as he watched Daryl bend at the waist, lowering his head toward the spinning metal teeth without a moment's pause or protection. The man positioned his face mere millimeters from certain disfigurement, so close that the blade's rotation created a current of air that disturbed his hair and rippled the skin of his cheeks. The whirring teeth, capable of slicing through hardwood like butter, spun inches from Daryl's eyes, nose, and lips. Yet Daryl didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't show even a flicker of the terror any rational human being would feel. His eyes remained fixed, his breathing steady, completely devoid of fear while courting mutilation. The demonstration video cut to black. Roger tore his gaze from the screen, bile rising in his throat as he glared up at Fuchs. The doctor's face was alight with the twisted pride of a creator showing off his most perfect abomination. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Fuchs asked, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. Roger lunged forward, his hand shooting out to seize Fuchs by the throat. The impact was swift and merciless. Fuchs crumpled to the floor with a choked gasp, his body folding like a marionette with cut strings. Desperate for stability, Fuchs clawed at the corner of the desk, fingers scrambling for purchase as he tried to hoist himself back up. Roger watched the pathetic display with cold detachment. As Fuchs began to rise, Roger's boot connected with his chest, a decisive thrust that sent the man sprawling back to the ground. The thud of Fuchs' body hitting the floor echoed in the room, punctuating Roger's silent rage. Fuchs remained on the floor, his body language suggesting defeat but his eyes calculating. The commotion had masked his slick sleight of hand as he snatched a tiny remote control from his desk, sliding it into his palm unnoticed. Roger worked the mouse with his free hand, keeping the Beretta steady on Fuchs. He clicked into the Disciple program's files, his throat tightening as more profiles of soldiers appeared on screen, an entire directory of sleepers. The implications made his stomach churn. Meanwhile, Fuchs slid his fingers discreetly under his leg, pressing a button on the concealed remote. Behind Roger, a flat-screen monitor began to quietly rise from a cabinet, the soft mechanical hum lost in the tension of the room. "My parents forced me to go to Bible study classes when I was young," Fuchs said, his voice taking on a professorial tone that made Roger's skin crawl. "And there was this detestable nun there, who made us memorize the names of all 12 apostles, along with the 70 disciples." His eyes glittered with malice disguised as intellectual curiosity. "None of it was of particular interest to me. But I never did forget Matthias, the disciple chosen to replace the more commercially minded Judas." Roger caught the cryptic cue in Fuchs' words. He scrolled through the files, his hand trembling slightly as he found one marked Matthias. When he clicked into it, the floor seemed to drop from beneath him. His own face stared back at him from the screen. Roger's world spun off its axis. He focused on a photograph of himself under heavy sedation, laid out on an operating table. His head was braced in a skull clamp, scalp peeled back like an orange rind, revealing the glistening rugose brain tissue underneath. Cold sweat broke out across his forehead as the horrifying truth began to crystallize. With the flat-screen monitor fully rising from its hidden compartment, Roger remained unaware as Fuchs' fingers spider-crawled toward a button. The monitor suddenly flared to life with a blaring sales pitch video. Roger spun around, instinctively raising his weapon and putting a bullet through the screen. The monitor exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. In that moment of distraction, Fuchs seized his opportunity. He leaped up from behind his desk with surprising agility and jabbed an electroshock prod into Roger's spine. Blue electricity arced between the electrodes before snapping into Roger's body. The jolt sent him crashing to the floor in a convulsive heap, muscles seizing beyond his control. Fuchs calmly retrieved Roger's fallen gun and leveled it at him. "Unless you have a pacemaker, you should be fit to stand," Fuchs said, his clinical tone betraying no emotion. He kept a safe distance as Roger slowly struggled to his feet, limbs still twitching as he found his equilibrium. The shock had left his nerves firing erratically, each movement requiring conscious effort. Have a seat, Mr. Eberly, Fuchs instructed, gesturing with the gun toward the chair opposite his desk. And please grip the armrests with 5 fingers. Roger settled into the chair, his fingers splayed across the armrests as directed. His mind was still grappling with what he'd glimpsed on the computer screen before destroying it. You have one of those implants. Roger's voice was hoarse with disbelief. In my head. Right on your motherboard, Fuchs confirmed with clinical detachment. Strange, isn't it? To know something's there you can't quite feel. Roger shook his head, the revelation hitting him in waves of horror and disbelief. When did you? Keeping the gun trained steadily on Roger, Fuchs moved closer to his bound, wiggling bodyguards, their muffled protests growing more urgent as their boss approached. Roger considers Fuchs' words carefully, his mind racing through fragmented memories of that helicopter crash in Afghanistan. The week he supposedly went missing exists in his memory as nothing more than disjointed flashes, bright lights, muffled voices, the sensation of being moved. The alarming void where those 7 days should be speaks volumes. Why did you choose me? Roger asks, his voice tight with barely contained rage. Fuchs moves with an unsettling confidence, looming over his own bodyguards like they're merely props in his twisted performance. His tall frame casts long shadows across the room as he positions himself. Ideal circumstances make for an ideal candidate, Fuchs replies with clinical detachment, as if discussing a lab specimen rather than a human life. Without warning, without even the courtesy of hesitation, Fuchs turns his gun on bodyguard 1 and 2. The gunshots crack through the air, 2 precise, economical pulls of the trigger. The men crumple to the floor, their bodies making dull thuds against the hardwood. No dramatic death throes, no final words. Just the ruthless efficiency of a man accustomed to discarding lives. Roger's muscles coil tight, his body instinctively preparing to launch himself forward despite the pounding in his head. His fingers dig into the armrests, knuckles whitening as adrenaline surges through him. Before he can move, Fuchs swings the gun back around, the barrel now pointing directly at Roger's chest. Their eyes lock, Fuchs' gaze cold and calculating, Roger's burning with a fury barely contained. Fuchs circled his desk, his tone almost gleeful as he continued. Please, Mr. Eberly, the seatbelt lights are still on. And considering that because you are defective, I would not hesitate decommissioning you altogether. Roger settled back into the chair, his muscles tense despite the appearance of compliance. The word caught in his mind like a barb. Defective, he asked, the single word heavy with disbelief. Fuchs moved around his desk with the casual confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He tapped at his computer keyboard, calling up an audio file with practiced precision. Before they set the hounds on you, we tried your deactivation code, Fuchs explained, his clinical tone making the sinister intent all the more chilling. Which meant one day they'd open up your garage and find you sitting in your car, exhaust fumes thick enough to choke a hippopotamus wafting out. His lips curled into the faintest smile. Alas, you were found to be less than receptive. With a theatrical click, Fuchs played the audio log. A phone rang several times before Roger heard his own voice answering. Hello. Hello. The recording of Roger paused, then added, I'll be here. All night. The recording ended abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Roger's mind raced, memories shifting and realigning as he processed this new information. That was you? He asked, his throat dry. Yes. Fuchs nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes. And what you couldn't hear, on the other end of the line, was your arming sequence. Fuchs gestured toward the bandaged contusion on Roger's head, the wound from when he'd been tackled outside the medical clinic. His finger hovered near it, not quite touching, but close enough that Roger could feel the implied threat. I can only assume that bump to the head knocked something loose, Fuchs said. Roger sat motionless, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align in his mind. The mysterious calls, the strange compulsions, the gaps in his memory. It was all starting to make terrible sense. Chapter 28, The Analyst's Fall. Roger's heart seemed to cease beating as the audio log played. Each word that emanated from the device felt like another nail in a coffin he didn't know was being built around him. It wasn't just Darrell Lee Unger Jocelyn was investigating, was it? Roger's voice cracked with realization. She found out I was a disciple too. Fuchs's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but it held no warmth. Your wife proved quite resourceful. He spat the words out like poison, a venomous admiration lacing his tone. The implications crashed over Roger like a tidal wave. You killed her, he accused, his voice barely above a whisper. Not I, Mr. Eberly. Fuchs maintained his composure, reaching over to click on another audio log. A familiar ringing echoed through the room, followed by Roger's own groggy voice answering, hello. Though nothing audible followed, an imperceptible shift could be sensed in the recording, like the ominous calm that presages thunderclouds. Then came Roger's voice again, now flat, monotonous, with cadenced breaths that sounded nothing like his normal speech. Designate access permissions. Fuchs's voice responded on the recording. November Mike Echo Kilo Echo 257. Authenticate. A brief, weighted silence hung in the air before Roger's recorded voice continued, mechanical and hollow. Administrative privileges granted. Welcome host user. Where is your wife, Lieutenant? Fuchs's recorded voice inquired. Downstairs. In the kitchen. Roger's automated response came without hesitation or emotion. Fuchs cut the recording and studied Roger's face with clinical detachment, watching with analytic curiosity as Roger grappled with the horrifying implications. The truth crashed through Roger's consciousness. He had been the unwitting weapon used against his own wife. His hands trembled as the enormity of his role in Jocelyn's death began to take shape in his mind, each realization cutting deeper than any blade ever could. Fuchs stepped closer, his voice clinical yet laced with a hint of triumph. We gave you specific instructions. Where you could find the stroke kit. How to inject your wife. His words hung in the air like poison. And that once you executed command, to return to bed and fall back asleep. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. It was as easy as pushing a button. Roger's universe imploded. The room seemed to tilt and spin around him as the horrific truth crashed through his consciousness. His lungs burned, unable to draw sufficient air. It was beyond comprehension, beyond anything he could process. The hardware was designed to ensure anything done while activated was blacked out of your anamnesis, Fuchs continued, his technical terminology making the monstrous act sound like a simple computer function. Like a redaction. Or at least in theory. Fuchs came around the desk with measured steps, his expensive shoes making soft sounds on the polished floor. He regarded Roger with probing eyes, his clinical curiosity unmistakable, like a scientist examining a particularly successful experiment. You really have no data remnants concerning your wife's murder, do you? Fuchs leaned in slightly, studying Roger's face for reactions. No stray memory fragment? No experiential recall, or abreactive episodes? His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Not even one nightmare about what really transpired that morning in your backyard? Roger couldn't speak. The confirmation came only in his silence, in the ghostly pallor that had washed over his face, in the nauseating wave of guilt that threatened to double him over. All this time, the nightmares that had haunted him, the grief that had consumed him, and he had been the instrument of his own destruction. Claire's murderer. Fuchs nodded to himself, a prideful smile spreading across his features. The expression of a man whose theory had been vindicated. They were reluctant to activate you, he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. Citing your emotional attachment to the kill element as an incalculable variable. He paused, savoring the moment. But I knew you would work. With casual deliberation, he raised his sidearm, pointing it directly at Roger's head. Roger looked up without objection, his expression welcoming the bullet. Death seemed a mercy now, an end to the unbearable truth he'd been forced to confront. Fuchs' finger hovered over the trigger, the slight tension in his knuckle betraying his readiness to fire. That's not the play you want to make here, Dr. Fuchs. The voice came from behind them, cool and authoritative. Fuchs cast a sidelong glance toward the door, where Ambrose and Arroyo had appeared like twin shadows, fanning out with silenced pistols trained on him. Fuchs straightened, indignation replacing his momentary surprise. "I represent $47 million in black-budget defense spending." "And if you don't put your gun down," Ambrose replied with dangerous calm, "I'll have fired a $47 million bullet." With visible reluctance, Fuchs released his grip. The gun fell from his hand, clattering against the floor in the otherwise silent room. Ambrose stepped carefully over the motionless bodies of the bodyguards, sprawled nearby. "Gave them a half-day, I see," he remarked dryly, stooping to retrieve Fuchs' discarded weapon before tucking it into his waistband. Turning his attention to Roger, Ambrose paused. What he saw wasn't just a broken man, but a hollow-eyed shell, an excavation site where a soul used to be. The emptiness there was profound, unsettling. "Broke it to him easy then, huh, Doc?" Ambrose's sarcasm cut through the heavy atmosphere. Fuchs squared his shoulders, defensive. "Who are you?" "I'm your chaperone for a little field trip we'll be taking." Ambrose's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And don't worry, your friend Witten signed your permission slip." Chapter 29, Strings of Power. The sterile corridor of neuroconcepts became their death march, Ambrose leading with his weapon trained on Fuchs, Arroyo guiding Roger from behind. Roger moved with an eerie resignation, each step bringing him closer to his planned execution, his body betraying none of the calculations racing through his mind. Fuchs, by contrast, couldn't hide his desperation, eyes darting as he searched for any possible escape. They were nearly at the elevator when movement caught their attention. The test monkeys skittered across their path, a blur of fur and frantic energy. Both guards instinctively raised their weapons, tracking the animal's erratic movements. It was the opening Roger needed. In that split second of distraction, Roger's entire demeanor transformed. His eyes shifted, clouding over like a shark's protective membrane sliding into place before a kill. With practiced precision, he stepped backward into Arroyo's space. His movements were fluid, almost beautiful in their deadly efficiency, as he seized the guard's wrist, twisting until ligaments tore with audible pops. The gun clattered to the floor. Before Arroyo could react, Roger yanked him closer and whipped his head backward. The reinforced steel of Roger's skull connected with Arroyo's nose with devastating force. The impact shattered bone and cartilage, driving shards upward with such violence that Arroyo's neck hyperextended beyond natural limits. The sickening crunch echoed through the corridor. Arroyo dropped to his knees, nose collapsed, neck bent at an impossible angle. His eyes fixed and dilated, as life departed his body in less time than it took to draw a breath. Ambrose spun at the commotion, but Roger was already moving, disappearing down a side hallway. Ambrose fired reflexively, bullets chipping concrete from the corner wall as his target vanished from view. A sharp ding echoed through the corridor. Ambrose whirled around to see Fuchs slipping away in the commotion, catching only a final glimpse of the man as he disappeared behind the merging elevator doors. With practiced precision, Ambrose raised his weapon and squeezed off several rounds. The bullets slammed into the metal doors, creating distinct indentations but failing to penetrate the reinforced steel. The dull thud of each impact reverberated through the hallway. Cutting his losses, Ambrose redirected his attention to his primary target. Roger remained his mission, his purpose. As he stepped over Arroyo's motionless body, his gaze fell on the dead man's fallen gun. A cold smile touched his lips. His quarry was unarmed, vulnerable. The hunt would end soon. Ambrose moved with predatory precision, following Roger's path around the corner into the deserted office wing of Neuroconcepts. The hallway stretched before him, a gauntlet of closed doors, anyone potentially concealing his quarry. The stillness felt unnatural in what should have been a busy corporate space. His silenced pistol led the way, an extension of his arm as he approached the first door. With a calculated kick, he sent it crashing open and swept the interior with his weapon. Nothing but abandoned phone cables and furniture draped in dust. The empty room mocked his efforts. Undeterred, Ambrose moved to the next door. Another powerful kick, another empty space. This time, however, something caught his eye. An empty fire axe cabinet recessed into the wall, its glass door ajar. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The third door revealed a storage room filled with upper extremity prostheses and compressed air cylinders, their metallic surfaces gleaming dully in the half-light. Still no Roger. Ambrose turned slowly toward the final unopened door at the end of the hallway. A predator's satisfaction flickered across his features. Having eliminated all other possibilities, he knew exactly where his prey was hiding. He approached the last door with deliberate steps, raised his foot, and crashed it open. Roger stood waiting, fire axe held high above his head. On a chair before him perched one of the high-pressure air tanks from the storage room, its nozzle aimed directly at the doorway. In the split second it took Ambrose to register the trap, Roger brought the axe down with devastating force. The blade sheared through the safety valve with a metallic crunch. Pressurized air exploded outward, launching the cylinder forward like a missile. The makeshift projectile struck Ambrose squarely in the midsection, propelling him backward down the hallway. A white contrail of escaping gas marked the cylinder's path, as Ambrose became an unwilling passenger, arms and legs flailing helplessly. The brutal journey ended when cylinder and man slammed into the far wall. Sheetrock cracked and crumbled on impact. Ambrose collapsed to the floor, his body a broken shell of shattered bone, utterly still and unmoving. Roger descended upon the aftermath of violence, his face expressionless as he surveyed what remained of Ambrose. The man lay broken on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. With methodical purpose, Roger crouched beside the dying figure, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The coldness in his eyes spoke of a man who had crossed into a realm where mercy no longer existed. "You said the name, Witten?" Roger's voice was low, controlled, the calm delivery making his deadly intent all the more chilling. Ambrose's chest heaved with labored breaths. Blood bubbled between his lips as he forced out what would be his final words. "Bo Witten," he managed, each syllable a struggle against encroaching death. A faint smile crossed Ambrose's ravaged face, the satisfaction of a man delivering one last act of vengeance before the end. Even in death, he found pleasure in condemning another man to face Roger's wrath. Roger straightened, not bothering to acknowledge Ambrose further. He moved toward the elevator with the unyielding purpose of an avenging angel, his footsteps measured and resolute. The righteous fury driving him forward was no longer hot and chaotic, but had crystallized into something far more dangerous, a cold, calculating rage that would not be denied. Behind him, Ambrose's breathing grew shallow, then ceased altogether. Roger left him to expire in solitude, granting him neither comfort nor further attention. His mind had already shifted to his next target. Bo Witten now had a place at the top of his list, and Roger was coming for him with all the force of biblical retribution. Chapter 30: The Scotch Gambit. Roger's quiet approach through the darkened Victorian colonial was deliberate, calculated. The house stood modestly among its more ostentatious neighbors on the tree-lined street, betraying nothing of the sins harbored within its walls. In the study, Bo Witten had passed out in his recliner, a half-empty bottle of scotch precariously balanced on the chair's arm. The muted television flickered with news about the Neuroconcepts incident, the very chaos he'd helped orchestrate. A thunderous rumbling penetrated Bo's alcohol-induced slumber. His eyes fluttered open, confusion momentarily clouding his face before recognition sparked alarm. The sound led him to his garage. Still disoriented from sleep and scotch, Bo tied his robe as he stumbled through the doorway. The tumble dryer quaked violently, whatever inside creating a cacophonous disturbance that echoed through the darkened space. With an irritated sigh, he flipped the light switch and approached the machine, shutting it off. When Bo pulled open the dryer door and found boots carelessly tossed inside, bewilderment creased his brow. The inexplicable discovery sent a chill down his spine. "Turn around slowly." The voice emerged from the shadows, cold and deliberate. Bo's face fell as realization dawned. He turned to find Roger materializing from the darkness, gun raised and unwavering. "My wife and son are upstairs," Bo pleaded, desperation edging his voice. "No. They're staying at the ski house in Maine for the weekend." Roger's words dropped like stones, each one revealing how thoroughly he'd planned this confrontation. Caught in his lie, Bo studied Roger carefully, searching for signs that he'd been activated, wondering if this was the programmed killer or the man seeking vengeance. "And you're here, of your own volition?" Bo ventured. The question ignited something primal in Roger. He crossed the space in 2 swift strides and pistol-whipped Bo across the face. The analyst crumpled to the floor as Roger stood over him, practically frothing with rage. The metallic tang of blood on Bo's split lip seemed to surprise the career analyst. It was clear he'd grown accustomed to orchestrating violence from afar, forgetting his own mortality in the process. "You had me murder my own wife," Roger said, his voice hollow with rage and disbelief. Bo's tongue darted out to touch the wound, a reflexive gesture of a man suddenly aware of his vulnerability. His eyes, however, remained calculating even as he fought to defend his life. "And you think that's the sum of my efforts?" Bo shifted his weight, wincing slightly. "When the Disciple program was first initiated, we focused on the radicals anxious to cash in on the promise of 72 virgins. The idea was that if we caught one of these would-be martyrs, we could reverse program them, release them, and have them blow up in the hands of their handlers." He paused to spit a glob of crimson onto the floor. "We called it hot potato." The casual way he described weaponizing human beings made Roger's grip tighten on his weapon. His knuckles whitened as a cold fury settled deeper into his bones. "But then you turned it on Americans," Roger said, each word precise and cutting. Bo's eyes narrowed, unrepentant. "All enemies, foreign and domestic. As a serviceman, you must think the ultimate sacrifice one can make for his country is giving his life. But sacrificing one's soul is a greater price to pay. And I've been eating this country's sins for the better part of the past decade." The self-righteousness in Bo's tone made bile rise in Roger's throat. He raised his gun, aiming between Bo's eyes with deadly precision. "You're a true patriot," Roger said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'll see to it they chisel your star onto the wall." Roger's finger tightened on the trigger, the moment of retribution finally at hand. But before he could complete the motion, a familiar voice cut through the tension from the doorway. "Set it on the floor, Mr. Eberly." Bo's face flooded with relief at the sight of Horace standing in the doorway, but Roger maintained his aim. His finger hovered over the trigger, calculating that he could easily kill Bo before Horace could stop him. The air between them crackled with lethal possibility. 1/100th of a second, Horace continued, his tone clinical. "That's approximately how long you'll have your vengeance." Roger's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. His jaw clenched as he weighed his options, the gun suddenly feeling heavier in his grip. After what seemed an eternity, he lowered the weapon. "Kick it away," Horace commanded. Roger's foot connected with the gun, sending it skittering across the concrete floor with a metallic scrape. Horace moved with practiced caution, keeping his own weapon trained on Roger while circling wide to position himself beside Bo. Bo turned to Horace, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I have painter's plastic upstairs. We can?" His words died as Horace's arms encircled his head with surprising speed. Before Bo could react, Horace had pressed a nasal inhaler into his nostril and administered something that dropped Bo's consciousness like a switch being flipped. Roger watched in stunned silence as Horace gently lowered Bo's limp form to the floor, handling him with an odd tenderness that contradicted the violence of the moment. "Mr. Witten wouldn't shoot himself," Horace said, turning to Roger. "He doesn't even own a gun. Not to mention, it's inconsistent with his personal grooming habits." Roger's brow furrowed as Horace meticulously wiped Bo's nose with a disinfectant cloth, the action disturbingly methodical. Roger stared at Horace, struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. The dimly lit room seemed to close in around them as Witten's body lay forgotten nearby. "I don't understand," Roger said, his voice barely above a whisper. Horace's thin lips curved into what might have passed for a smile on anyone else. He gestured toward the bathroom cabinet with an almost professorial air. "Moisturizers. Deep pore cleansers," he explained, as if delivering a lecture on forensic psychology. A man plagued by obsessive vanity would not blow his own head apart. Roger watched, frozen in place, as Horace reached into his jacket and produced a length of thick rope with deliberate slowness. The casual way he handled it made Roger's stomach turn. Nor would he overdose, Horace continued, his voice maintaining that eerily calm cadence. Considering his wife's religious leanings have kept the medicine cabinet stocked with only organic herbal remedies over the years. With practiced efficiency, Horace spotted a step ladder nearby and dragged it beneath an exposed overhead pipe. The metal scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Roger's pulse quickened as Horace climbed up and began tying one end of the rope to the pipe. When Horace turned back toward him, the other end of the rope had been fashioned into a perfect noose. It swung gently in the still air, casting a serpentine shadow across the floor. "This is how Mr. Whitten would choose to tender his resignation," Horace announced, stepping down from the ladder. Roger's mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. "But why would he stammered. "Opt out." Horace finished for him, seeming almost pleased at Roger's confusion. "To avoid being brought before a Senate Oversight Committee. To spare himself that disgrace. And the company." The cold calculation in Horace's voice sent a chill down Roger's spine. This wasn't grief or shock, this was business. "But he was your boss," Roger managed, hearing the naivety in his own words even as they left his mouth. The tension in the room crystallized around Horace's cold words. His face remained impassive, the face of a corporate soldier who had weathered countless storms for his employers. "I'm a company man," Horace stated flatly, his voice carrying the weight of unwavering loyalty. "And you can't bury something like this without a body." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he delivered his next words with deliberate precision. "You should leave now. Because if my superiors find out about you, well, you are the type of man who would turn a gun on himself." The threat lingered in the air between them, as tangible as smoke. Roger felt its implications settle into his bones. He said nothing in response. There was nothing to say to such a calculated warning. Instead, he cast one final glance toward Beau, taking in the man's defeated posture, the hollowness in his eyes. Once a friend, now just another casualty in this expanding web of deception. Without another word, Roger turned and walked out, the subtle click of the door behind him sounding with grim finality. Horace's threat echoed in his mind, not as fear, but as fuel for what would come next. Moonlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting faint silver silhouettes of two sleeping forms beneath the covers. The harsh ring of a phone shattered the night's silence. A hand emerged reluctantly from beneath the duvet, fumbling for the lamp chain. The sudden warm light revealed Graydon, his eyes squinting against the intrusion, hair tousled from sleep. Beside him, his matronly wife remained undisturbed, her breathing steady and deep. Graydon reached for the receiver, pressing it to his ear. "Yes." His voice was low, controlled despite being awakened at this hour. In the garage of the Whitten residence, Horace stood in the shadows, his gaze fixed on Beau's body. The man who had been Graydon's rival at the CIA now hung motionless, his legs no longer twitching in their final desperate dance above a toppled chair. The scene held a terrible stillness. Horace raised his cell phone to his ear, his voice matter-of-fact. "It's done." "I appreciate the call," Graydon replied, his tone betraying neither regret nor satisfaction. "Just acknowledgement." He replaced the receiver with careful precision, then turned to his sleeping wife. Graydon planted a gentle kiss on her cheek before settling back against his pillow. Within moments he drifted back to sleep, his conscience unburdened by the night's events, as if the orchestration of a colleague's death were nothing more than a minor item checked off his to-do list. Chapter 31: Oasis of Evil. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, casting shimmering waves of heat across the landscape. The air was so dry it seemed to pull moisture from every pore, leaving throats parched and lips cracked within minutes of exposure. Amid this harsh desolation stood a striking contradiction, a luxurious compound rising from the undulating dunes like a mirage made manifest. Its pristine walls and manicured grounds defied the surrounding barrenness, creating an artificial paradise in nature's most unforgiving terrain. Evaporative mist coolers hissed softly around the pool pavilion, creating an oasis of comfort amid the sweltering desert heat. White-robed servants moved with practiced efficiency across the platform connecting the estate to the impressive terrace that seemed to float in the center of the azure pool. They carried platters laden with sliced fruits, vibrant melons, succulent dates, and glistening berries arranged in intricate patterns. With downcast eyes and deferential nods, the servants positioned their offerings among the cooling fans. Their movements were deliberately quiet, almost choreographed in their precision. None dared disturb the meeting taking place. Having completed their task, they retreated silently, backing away before turning to disappear into the estate. On one side of the gathering sat Faisal, his face bearing the smooth confidence of a man in his early 30s who had never known want. The traditional Arab headdress framed features that betrayed no emotion, despite his reputation as a significant financier of international terrorism. Beside him sat Hassan, the lines around his eyes testifying to his late 30s and the hardships of his chosen path. The Yemeni jihadist wore his own headdress with a veteran's ease, seemingly unconcerned that his name occupied a prominent position on the CIA's kill list, a distinction he had earned through blood and calculated violence. Opposite them sits Dr. Haskell Fuchs, his pasty complexion marking him clearly as a tourist among the tanned locals. His gaze lingers on the lavish spread before them, plates of exotic fruits, perfectly sliced imported melon, and an impressive cluster of grapes that dominates the center of the table. After a moment of contemplation, he turns his attention back to his hosts. When Moses sent chieftains from the 12 tribes to scout out the land of Canaan and report back whether it was conquerable, Fuchs says with the air of someone accustomed to lecturing, they returned with a cluster of grapes as large as what you have here. His eyes flick between them, noting their reactions. But I suppose neither of you have heard that story. Faisal's refined, Cambridge-educated voice carried across the room, his English impeccable as he addressed Dr. Fuchs. As a matter of fact, Dr. Fuchs, I do know that story. His tone was measured, scholarly. And as I recall, the majority of Moses's 12 spies, frightened by the fortified cities and giants they had seen, reported that their promised land could neither be claimed nor conquered. And the Israelites, lacking both faith and resolve, believed them. A momentary pause fell over the room, as Hassan leaned toward Faisal, his lips moving in rapid Arabic. The two men conferred quietly, Faisal nodding with understanding as he served as interpreter. The tension in the air seemed to thicken, as Faisal turned back toward Fuchs, his expression hardening slightly. As Brother Hassan points out, Faisal continued, his cultured voice making the chilling sentiment all the more disturbing, it's not that we fail to recognize the existence of the infidels. Rather, it's that we don't recognize their right to a continued existence. The words hung in the air, their deadly implication unmistakable. Fuchs remained impassive, seemingly unshaken by the open hostility. So with that in mind, Fuchs inquired, leaning forward slightly, what are your thoughts on my proposition? Without hesitation, Faisal turned to Hassan and began translating Fuchs's question, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Faisal shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he delivered the message. Brother Hassan feels it is a very costly endeavor. Fuchs leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The tension in the room thickened as he addressed Faisal directly. You're the purse, Faisal. Hassan's just another hand that reaches in. His voice carried a dismissive edge. Now, given I'm not privy to what's on your balance sheets, I'm pretty sure you could finance this project by dipping into your champagne fund. The jab about luxury expenditures hit its mark. Faisal's expression hardened as he defended his position. The money I give you is money I do not give to our holy warriors. This is what you must understand. Fuchs noticed Hassan's involuntary reaction, a quick glance toward the bowl of grapes on the table. It was the opening he needed. Ignoring Faisal, he pivoted toward Hassan, his tone shifting to something more dangerous and direct. You gave yourself away, Hassan, when your eyes went to the grapes at my mention of them. Fuchs's voice dropped lower, more intimate, as he moved in for the kill. So I'll tell you now what I understand. He paused, letting the words hang in the air before continuing with clinical precision. Your network's at a point right now where they can't even get a printer cartridge past customs. And your recruits from within the U.S., well, without putting too fine a point on it, they aren't exactly mastermind material. Fuchs leaned back, confidence radiating from him as he delivered his closing argument. As I see it, my proposal offers you a viable alternative. An implanted tourist can be activated with one phone call. We're talking about people who don't pop up on the American no-fly lists. People from non-profiled countries. His eyes gleamed with the cold calculation of a businessman closing a deal. The perfect sleepers. Hassan leaned forward, his eyes intense enough to cut through reinforced steel. Faisal began to translate, but Hassan silenced him with a dismissive wave. What you are offering, how do we know this is for real? Hassan asked in accented English. Fuchs met Hassan's penetrating gaze without flinching. Because if I was a speck on the horizon, and you were standing at the CIA's doorstep, they'd shove you aside to take a shot at me. The tension between them was palpable, a silent battle of wills playing out across the ornate table. After a protracted stare-off, Hassan finally eased back in his chair, the subtle shift in his posture signaling a decision had been made. We accept your proposal, Hassan said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Outside, the desert sun beat down mercilessly as Faisal led Fuchs through the front entrance of the estate. The heat rippled off the pavement in visible waves, distorting the air around them. A valet appeared, driving a weather-beaten 90s-era Range Rover that seemed out of place amid the estate's obvious wealth. Faisal threw his hands up in mock disgust, his expression a blend of genuine horror and theatrical display. Allah forgive me, but such vulgar means of transport brings immense disgrace to my home, he declared, gesturing toward Fuchs's vehicle with barely concealed disdain. I shall give you a new car, and provide you with your own driver and security team. He began walking toward his own luxury automobile, each step deliberate, a man accustomed to having his generosity accepted without question. Fuchs smiled thinly, appreciating the offer but already decided. I appreciate that, but these days I prefer to keep my own company. Without waiting for further protest, Fuchs climbed into his Range Rover, the door closing with a solid thud that emphasized his finality. The engine rumbled to life, and he pulled away, watching Faisal's diminishing figure in his rearview mirror. The solitude of his vehicle felt like armor now, a barrier between himself and a world he no longer fully trusted. Chapter 32: Fire from Above. The Range Rover cut a solitary path across the empty desert landscape, the only vehicle for miles on the dusty thoroughfare. Inside, Fuchs drove with a noticeable lightness about him, fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel as he whistled his signature tune, The Ants Go Marching. His demeanor suggested a man pleased with recent developments, optimistic about what lay ahead. The satellite phone's harsh ring cut through his whistling. He reached casually for it in the center console, bringing it to his ear without breaking his rhythm. Yes, he answered expectantly. How did your meeting go, Dr. Fuchs? Roger's voice came through the speaker, clear and controlled. The effect was instantaneous. Fuchs' breath caught in his throat, his foot slamming the brake pedal reflexively. The Range Rover screeched to a violent halt on the empty road, dust billowing around it. Fuchs' eyes darted frantically, scanning first the road ahead, then the rearview mirror. Nothing but empty desert stretched in both directions, miles of nothingness that suddenly felt like a trap. I'm sure you impressed them, Roger continued, his voice eerily calm. I just hope they didn't pay you in advance. Fuchs finally managed to unfreeze his vocal cords. Where are you? His voice cracked, betraying his mounting fear. Not as close as you think. The realization struck Fuchs like a physical blow. His gaze lifted skyward, searching the vast blue expanse until he caught it, a metallic glint high above, the sun reflecting off what could only be one of the orbital satellites. A soft whimper escaped his lips, the sound of a man who suddenly understood his own mortality, who had just received a terminal diagnosis. You were right, Dr. Fuchs, Roger's voice continued, cold and precise. It's as easy as pushing a button. The line went dead with a decisive click. Fuchs let the phone drop from his trembling hand. He reached for the air conditioning dial with unsteady fingers, cranking it to full blast as beads of sweat formed on his brow, a futile gesture against the cold fear that had nothing to do with the desert heat. The desert heat shimmered off the asphalt when the Range Rover disappeared in a violent eruption. One moment it crawled along the road. The next, obliterated completely, consumed by a blinding fireball that sent debris scattering across the barren landscape. Inside Trailer 18, at Humboldt Air Force Base, Roger couldn't tear his eyes from the GCS monitor. The incandescent mushroom cloud filled the screen, its orange glow reflecting in his unblinking eyes. He sensed Colonel Olmsted behind him, the man's presence as heavy as the silence between them. Roger's fingers hovered over the controls, trembling slightly. Had he really just done that? Taken lives with the press of a button from thousands of miles away. The reality of it settled into his bones like lead. Both men turned toward Gil, who hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he monitored the drone's diagnostics and flight path. The blue light from the screen cast shadows across his concentrated face. According to its transponder code, the drone hasn't left the base, Gil announced, the weight of his words falling into the room. Roger understood the unspoken message beneath Gil's technical language. They were in the clear. No official trace of the operation. Plausible deniability. He turned to Olmsted, opening his mouth, but found himself unable to form words. What could he possibly say after what they'd just done? Olmsted's face remained impassive, a mask perfected through years of similar operations. "Just make sure it's back in the garage before Dad gets home," he said, his tone casual, as if they'd borrowed a car rather than conducted an unauthorized strike. With that, Olmsted turned and exited the trailer, the door closing behind him with a metallic click. Roger swiveled back to his GCS, fingers finding their familiar positions as he began directing the drone back to base. On the screen, the smoke from the explosion still lingered, a dark stain against the desert sky. Roger pulled his car to a stop in the quiet street, taking in the scene of quintessential Middle America. American flags fluttered from porch posts, and the hum of lawnmowers punctuated the afternoon as homeowners tended to their patches of green. This was suburbia at its most idyllic, a place seemingly untouched by the darkness he had been swimming through. He glanced at the mailbox, checking the number against the paperwork spread across his passenger seat. The files, taken from Fuchs' office, contained everything on every active asset in the Disciple program, each one labeled with their biblical aliases. Roger pulled out one particular file, studying the photograph of Paul Meacham, the fourth member of the missing fire team Norman had mentioned back at his cabin. Through the windshield, Roger watched as Paul stood over a kettle barbecue, smoke curling around him as he flipped burgers with practiced care. Paul's wife arranged plates on a checkered tablecloth while their son placed silverware beside each setting. The scene radiated a domestic tranquility that made Roger's chest tighten. This was it. This was what had been stolen from him. A normal life. Family. Security. The sight crystallized everything into sharp focus, transforming his grief into purpose. This moment, this glimpse of what should be protected, would fuel his crusade. Roger stepped out of the car, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. His shoes pressed into the manicured lawn as he approached the family gathering, his determination building with each step. He was no longer just seeking answers. He was fighting for something pure in a corrupt world. The end.